Next slide, please. To tackle the issue of digital connectivity, Indonesia government appointed Bakti to be function as the government agency to provide quality and targeted universal service obligation services to address digital divide in Indonesia through the development of both infrastructure and ecosystem, specifically in the remote area, which is a frontier, outermost, and least developed regions across the country. The concept of the USO telecommunications and informatics is one of the government efforts to equalize the ICT network for a better society. Next, please. Indonesia is currently paving the path to be one of the top 10 world economy in 2030, thus making Indonesia 4.0 initiation to face the Industrial Revolution 4.0 and to strengthen the society 5.0. In terms of digitalization transformation, people are required to become more technology and internet literate. With the limitation of physical meeting and contact, virtual world become the only solution for the needs. Seeing those opportunities and challenges, on August 3, 2020, President Jokowi stated the mission to accelerate digital transformation is shown. Bakti carries out one of the mandates for the president regarding infrastructure development. Next slide, please. During his speech on the ITU RDF session yesterday, our minister has stated his commitment to turn this pandemic crisis into a giant leap in transforming our digital ecosystem. Vigorous collaboration has enabled Indonesia to deploy massive digital infrastructure. Next slide, please. Briefly, the portrait of Indonesia ICT infrastructure could be described as shown in the table. It consists of three layers: national backbone, middle mile network, as well as last mile network. The government has succeeded to deploy more than 12,000 kilometers of Palaparding fiber optic to be used by the telecommunication stakeholder to connect the country. To connect city and district, the government used fiber link network, microwave link, and satellites. In 2023, Satria satellite will, with the capacity of 150 gigabits per second, would operate to support Indonesia connectivity. In the third layer, Indonesia has more than 400,000 base transfer station or BTS. Next, please. This image depicts how internet reachability across Indonesia. For more than 80,000 villages in Indonesia, more than 12,000 has no 4G access. And those more than 9,000 villages are in the, we call it 3-tier Asia, which is the outermost part of Indonesia, are under Bakti responsibility. Okay, next please. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows you that 150,000 public service points in Indonesia still have no or have inadequate internet access. Most of the points are schools, local authorities office, and medical facility. This issue will be tackled through government initiative to build Satria satellite. Next, please. Knowing the fact on how Bakti works and what Bakti does to develop Indonesia digital infrastructure, it will be more insightful to share to you how cooperation between stakeholders become Bakti main fuels to run the mission to provide equal access to Indonesia citizens. Briefly, Bakti Main programs are BTS, Internet Access, Palaparing, Multifunctional Satellite, Ecosystem, and Broadcasting. These programs would not effectively run without cooperation. From the very start of the Bhakti business process, the funding to the end utility process of Bhakti products, cooperation and partnerships becomes the prominent point of Bhakti business. Bhakti funding comes from the telecommunication operator sale. About 1.25% of their annual gross revenue. In 2021, the government would spend their budget to build the infrastructure for the first time after the discussion of multi-sectoral institutions, such as Minister of Planning, Minister of Finance, Representative of Council, and MCIT itself. Bhakti also works alongside consultants to do the study of the need of Indonesia digital infrastructure development. To build the satellite, Bhakti is currently working with Thales Alenia Space from France, and receiving investment fund from the BPI France, as well as from the China AIIB. This satellite procurement process is done through PPP scheme, public-private partnership. The same scheme applied to execute our previous project, Palaparing project. To build the BTS and internet access, Bhakti alongside vendors and from the private sector work together to make sure that the treaty area, which is the outermost area in Indonesia, are covered with 4G access. Bhakti current priority is to intensive development of digital infrastructure in Indonesia. Those in the commercially feasible would be done by the operator, and those are not in commercially feasible areas would be executed by Bhakti. To solve the connectivity problem in non-commercial area, Bhakti works along big to small private partners through various schemes, whether common procurement scheme, multi-years cooperation to PPP, to ensure all sectors are involved to reduce the digital gap in Indonesia. Private sectors are needed with their own notable initiative to complement the government effort to tackle the connectivity issue and to support the Indonesia digital economy initiative. There are still many rooms of development to be performed in terms of digital infrastructure, and cooperation is the key to digital transformation. I hope this forum can give insight to the development of ICT infrastructure in your respective countries. Thank you for the attention.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anand. Yes, so towards 2030, in coming 10 years, it will be quite busy years.
Hopefully.
For you, right?
This is our dream.
Okay, yeah. Then next, I would like to invite Mr. CK Fong from Axiata Group. And once again, CK, please make your presentation briefly as much as possible with maximum 6 minutes. So you have a floor, CK.
Thank you, Kondo-san. Right. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I wish to thank the ITU for inviting me to share fresh perspectives as a member of the private sector operating in the region. My colleagues call me CK. I'm currently the Group Head of Regulatory Affairs for Axiata. We are headquartered in Kuala Lumpur, and we are operating in the telco and IT space across 11 countries in Southeast Asia and South Asia. Can I get my screen up? Okay, maybe while I wait for the screen to go up, I just want to show you, give you a quick background of who Axiata is. We are a mobile operations business in 6 countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And we operate one of the largest mobile wallets in Malaysia and Sri Lanka. We also in digital advertising, and we own edotco, which is one of the largest independent tower companies in the region. Can I get the slides up, or do I control the slides myself? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, let's move on to the third slide. Next one, please. Next one, please. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I will begin with a chart from a recent World Bank report. And this report was issued just a few weeks ago, and it shows the number of economies in the world experiencing a contraction in GDP due to the COVID-19 pandemic. You can see the COVID-19 spike on the furthermost right side. It shows the severity of the effect to the world economically. And to me, it's mind-blowing because it is as impactful as some of the most previous global crises, including up to the Great Depression. Next slide, please. And throughout yesterday's sessions, we have heard from various leaders, including Director BDT herself, that good broadband connectivity is essential. I think this is so true. We have heard so many stories where mom and pop retailers in the markets that we operate in, they're suffering because lockdowns have forced them to run out of business, and they don't have, because they don't have digital channels, they cannot continue their business in the normal way. We've heard stories of where school children have difficulty in continuing education because they lack access to online education, or even when they have online education available, some of the lower income households have to share smartphones because they're not enough smartphones for each kid, right? So they have to share education. That is quite sad. Even us in the telco sector, we had to accelerate our own digital channels because in some markets, we have found that our customers cannot get to the physical retail stores to do a credit top-up. And I was in a panel again last week, and the same panel was the regulator from Singapore. And he, even in Singapore, emphasized that the essentialness of connectivity and broadband. And without broadband, the whole issue of digitization cannot happen in society. So unless, and this panel today is very important because then if we get a chance to talk about how we can put in right policies to help encourage good broadband connectivity. Because if we do nothing, then we risk opening up a new digital divide. Next slide, please. So it's obvious that in our economies, the adoption of digital has been an uptick. So the chart on the left-hand side shows from BCG shows that in various economies in Asia Pacific, from India to China, digital adoption has increased significantly in the COVID era, where from we have a huge double-digit upticks in e-commerce to digital media to e-learning and e-payments. So in Malaysia too, the digital economy represents somewhere close to about 19 to 20% of national GDP. And I think this was a analysis done before COVID. I think when the analysts do the calculations again, in the new normal, I think the digital economy will present a bigger percentage of the national GDP. Next slide, please. And this is important because we have long known that broadband connectivity has a significant positive economic multiplier effect. So for each increase in fixed and mobile penetration and adoption, there's a corresponding increase in the GDP contribution, and that is a very well documented and research phenomenon. On the right-hand side, there's also a similar multiplier effect for digital economy in the larger, broader sense. So this is some numbers from Accenture, and it shows that in every uptick in digital economy, there's also a huge upside in GDP for the country. And this is important because for emerging economies, for developing economies, these multipliers are evidence that we have to get the basic right, which means that we need to promote good broadband connections. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. Knowing how important broadband connectivity is, we need to work together to encourage a virtuous cycle in telecoms investment. I think there are two buckets of thoughts in this regard. First, we need to ensure pro-investment policies in place, including open up of subsectors to FDI. Also important to ensure an environment which encourages, instead of discouraging, more investments into the sector. And in some markets that we're seeing today, we are seeing some policymakers trying actually to cut the scope of activities allowed in our core operating licenses. So these things don't help increase investment, actually they will dampen investments. The second point is about regulatory enablers. And here I put the word bold action is needed. Some weeks ago, I was talking to some policymakers in one of the South Asian countries, and we're talking about how we need to create a virtuous investment cycle. And this was in respect to high spectrum prices. As we know, some markets actually have this idea of, imposing high spectrum fees so that the money can be used for the fiscal budget. I think that kind of thinking needs to be changed, because we need the money back into the network. And where we can save money, we will put it back into the network. And this means that we will be able to create a virtuous cycle of investments. So issues, for example, like sector-specific taxes, expensive spectrum fees need to be resolved. We need more spectrum resources, even for 4G and in upcoming 5G. Remove constraints, sharing of infrastructure, flexible spectrum rights, and creating wholesale markets for dark fiber, ducts, and towers. At this point, I want to congratulate the government of Indonesia, because some weeks ago, the government of Indonesia actually passed through Parliament the omnibus law, which actually allows for the first time ever active infrastructure sharing in Indonesia. And that actually this measure will actually accelerate the amount of infrastructure, deepen the network into the more rural areas of Indonesia. And that is a very good move. Lastly, of course, this is a perennial problem for all of us. Resolve bureaucracy bottlenecks for local permitting and right-of-way. I think if all these issues are resolved, we will be in a good shape to create a virtuous investment cycle and to ensure that greater levels of investments in the sector and get broadband to everybody. So public and private sector must work together to resolve this once and for all. Thank you for listening. I hope to answer any of your questions. Back to you, Kondo-san. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, CK. Yeah, thank you for your presentation, which includes a kind of a concrete idea and proposal. And next, I would like to invite Mr. Omar Mansouri Ansari from Afghanistan. He is acting chairman, Afghanistan Telecom Regulatory. So, Mr. Ansari, you have a floor. Mr. Ansari, do we have him?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you so much, Mr. Kondo.
Oh, okay, yes.
And good morning and afternoon to everybody. Very pleased to be part of this session, although I was originally on another session, but then moved to this one. So had little time to prepare for the partnerships. Let me give you an overall picture of the Afghan telecom, excuse me, industry of Afghanistan. We have about 7,210 base stations, 2,861 are 2G enabled, the 3,549 3G and 841 4G enabled sites in Afghanistan. We haven't done our spectrum auction for the 4G, but we're working on it. In the coming 2 to 3 months, we'll be able to complete the auction, and then we'll move to 5G in Afghanistan. Mobile telephone population coverage is 90%. Landline phones are very low in Afghanistan, 134,000. GSIM subscribers active are 22 million. 4G broadband subscribers are 824K. 3G broadband subscribers are 6.9 million, 6.5 million. 2G broadband subscribers are 2.9 million. We have laid a fiber of 9,000 kilometers across Afghanistan. Bandwidth price, however, in Afghanistan is higher than other countries in the region. It includes $60 to $150 per Mbps, depending on location in redundancy. Next slide, please. Now, coming to the partnership we have started, it's been 7-8 months for me working at ATRA. The initiatives we have taken started working on policy making in collaboration with Ministry of Communications in IT. We have started initiatives on legal and regulatory reforms. I've been working on strategy development in the country and also working with different institutions on research in the sector. Also with the PPP, Afghanistan Public-Private Partnership Unit in the Ministry of Finance and the center of the government. We're working on investment promotion. Infrastructure sharing has been an issue in Afghanistan, but we have developed regulatory procedures to address the issues related to both active and passive infrastructure sharing. We're supporting different digitalization initiatives started by ATRA, different ministries in Afghanistan. We're also taking a initiative to develop national programs. We're contributing to both planning and implementation. This includes programs on digital literacy, program on infrastructure development, and programs on creating awareness and creating demand for using ICTs in Afghanistan in the internet. So awareness and education and demand creation has been at the core of our activities. We're working hard on this to create more awareness among the people who are lacking digital skills and competencies. So, and also for the people to understand what the benefits of utilizing technologies are. And this is across the country. We, in the last 7 months, we have developed 30 regulatory procedures that includes different topics such as infrastructure development, in sharing, towers, fiber, both active and passive, right-of-way, ISP issues, consumer issues, cross-border transit issues, quality of services, competition, tariff, economic regulation, and so on. On strategies, as I said earlier, it includes infrastructure development strategy, telecom security strategy, and universal access strategy. There are 25 more regulatory procedures that are underway. We're working on it and will be done in the coming 2 to 3 months. Next, please. Here are a few good things that we've accomplished. We're working on more. I will share perhaps in our next meetings the development taking place in Afghanistan. On the open access policy, we have adopted this, and based on that, we've issued 4 optical national infrastructure development for fiber optics, the licenses, 4 licenses. We just approved, the ATRA board just approved 1 more national fiber license. We're also working on regional and metropolitan fiber. That includes FTTH, fiber to the home, which is focusing on distribution. The other one is focusing on the national licenses are focusing on transit and transmission, but the regional and metropolitan, they're focusing on distribution networks. So there will be 4 metropolitan and FTTH licenses issued in the coming week. We're also working on initiatives for village connectivity, both fiber, wired and wireless. On the regional connectivity, for the benchmarks for us for the metropolitan licenses would be to connect 174,000 households in Kabul, extend 2,400 kilometers of fiber across Kabul, cover 30% of the population in Kabul. That is about 1.4 million people in the city. Attract an investment of 29.5 million, which is already confirmed by the people who applied, investors who applied for the license, but we're working on increasing the investment so that we can connect more households in the country through the FTTH. On regional connectivity, we are very interested and have been working with the Central Asian neighbors, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, on fiber connectivity. An agreement has been just signed with the Turkmenistan. We already are connected with the Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, but working on enhancing the connectivity with both countries. On regional cooperation, as I said, we're very interested in connectivity infrastructure sharing. We don't have direct access to the submarine fiber. That should be done through either Pakistan or Iran. One of the reasons that the price of bandwidth in Afghanistan is a little too high is that we're dependent on our neighbors, but we are looking for solutions to see how we can bring this down. So also coordinating with Iran and interested to coordinate on this with Pakistan and other countries in the north of Afghanistan on cross-border frequency spillovers. There has been an issue and we're interested in resolving that. So in the previous slide, I spoke about the PPP investment in promotion. We're working on both local investment promotion and also attracting foreign direct investment in Afghanistan. We've been supporting many institutions in the country on ICT development. The purpose is to increase the demand for ICT utilization across various government organizations. Next, please. This is my last slide. I have a list of recommendations for ITU and colleagues who are in the panel. We need to develop work on standards, both 5G, since a lot of countries in the region are new to 5G. They will be working on their plans and programs. So coordination and collaboration on standards development, not only for 5G, but for fiber and future tech. This will be very, very important for all of us to learn from the experiences of each other. The knowledge sharing is key to the regional development and cooperation. On direction, ITU, definitely we have been getting a lot of support from ITU colleagues, both in the Asia Pacific region and in the headquarters. But it would be great to enhance that collaboration to help different countries with goal setting and directions. Also, we recommend that many countries, since they are facing similar challenges, whether COVID-19 or the 5G and other technology deployment in different urban and rural areas, it would be great to have clusters of the countries who are similar, working on similar initiatives so they can learn from the experiences of others. This could be done through regular meetings and discussions and events. In Afghanistan, we're taking an industrial approach because we have been investing on the infrastructure so much in the past 15 to 20 years. But we have a pretty much, a good infrastructure in Afghanistan, although a lot of investment is needed to upgrade the infrastructure. But infrastructure alone is not enough. We need to take an industrial approach. For example, support IT industry, the IT-enabled service industry, e-commerce, digital media and digital content. This will help the people in different regions to understand the benefit of the utilizing technology. In Afghanistan, we have a big issue with the local content and technology. Everything is in English, and majority of the population is non-English speaking, and it's they don't see like the return on investment factor really attractive, considering the price of internet in Afghanistan. So investing on local content and technology will be really beneficial for the local community to start utilizing bandwidth and internet. With that, in Afghanistan, we need to develop the missing bits and pieces, such as we don't have a really strong IXP in the country. ATRA has been working on an initiative to create more internet exchange points across different regions. There will be like 6 IXPs in the coming future, which will be supported by the Afghanistan Telecom Regulatory Authority. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Ansari, for your introduction of overall picture of Afghanistan and what you are doing. Then, thanks to Atsuko-san, we have a time up to 1 o'clock, which means still 10 minutes. And finally, I would like to invite Anna from World Bank. And after that, I would like to take some time for Q&A session or the discussion time. So Anna, you have a floor. And please start when you are ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So I won't take too much time for a presentation today. I also feel a little bit like an outsider here, not talking about some of the complex infrastructure issues that are required to be solved to address the connectivity challenges. So I'm going to talk a little bit about partnerships that are needed for users and communities and how to strengthen the use of technology for digital transformation. So next slide, please. So my colleague from Bhakti has already covered quite a bit on some of the key challenges within Indonesia, so I won't spend too much time. Just to note that this is a country that's rapidly digitizing, and I think one of the other colleagues had presented the rapid increase in the use of technology since the onset of COVID. Next. So some of the key challenges are, of course, in a country like Indonesia, related to the connectivity and the infrastructure challenges, and to get that infrastructure out across a very complex terrain, but also to highlight that a number of the key challenges that emerge around digitalization and the effective use of digital technologies relates to digital literacy and the competencies of people to be able to effectively use the new technologies that are being rolled out. And this will require a number of different partnerships across different ministries and public and private sector partners to really enable the effective use of that technology and the consolidation around issues like service delivery. Next. So Indonesia has a huge potential for digital technology, and the president, as was noted in one of the previous presentations, the president has put a huge premium on now rolling out digital technologies. The onset of the COVID-19 has only exacerbated this further as kids are out of school and relying on online school methods and other types of ways to access schooling. Services have been disrupted, and particularly since about half of the country continues to live in rural areas, some in very far-flung and remote areas, the prospects for digital technology is now huge. So a number of different line ministries, the Cominfo and Bhakti are looking very critically at the connectivity issues, but now all of the different line ministries are really rapidly looking how to digitize some of the service delivery and reach some of those far-flung areas in a more systematic way. Next. So we from the Social Development Unit support the Ministry of Villages in the effective implementation of the village law. And this is supporting the ministry in seeing through some of its transformative agendas, including how to better leverage digital technologies for service delivery. So this is an area where the technology-based systems can strengthen village institutions to deliver services more effectively to communities, but also how communities can play a bigger role in actively setting the standards and the demands for the types of services that could be required. Next. Next. So one of the key issues in designing or in discussing how digital technology can lead to improved service delivery is really looking at this from a much more programmatic angle. So as was mentioned, the connectivity is really a key piece of how to foster the spread of digital technologies, but layered immediately on top of that is how do we get people to really understand how to more effectively use those digital systems to potentially solve local issues or local problems. So moving communities from consumers to actual people who are participating more effectively in how services get delivered at the front lines is really critical. And this kind of effective use piece is a really important piece. Then layered on top of that is now a push within the larger government to look at how to digitize the services more effectively. And if left for every single line ministry to do on their own, this will lead to a flurry of different applications and systems being rolled out at the local level by different line ministries in a very uncoordinated way. So partnerships is really at the core of how the government can be thinking about better integrating service delivery at the front line and supporting the rollout of those digital systems in a much more effective and useful way. Next. So this whole of government approach is really at the core of how digital innovation can then be fostered in an environment like Indonesia. So the whole of government approach looks at the connectivity at the core and looks at how the connectivity gets rolled out alongside the effective use, and how the different line ministries and service providers can align behind the government approach in terms of providing services in a much more integrated way, particularly around issues in rural development, where potentially the digital divide has been a little bit greater and the uptake of some of the digital technologies has been a little bit slower. So this coordinated approach, once the government in and of itself can look at this as a kind of whole of government leveraging digital innovation, could immediately see where some of the partnerships between different line ministries under the support of, for example, the Cominfo on the connectivity piece, or the Ministry of Villages as coordinating approaches for villages, how the different service providers can align behind that and see the synergy. So I'll give just a brief example. Now with the rolling out of digital technologies and education in the country, the Ministry of Education had requested budget for the next year to roll out, to digitize every single school in the country. They didn't receive the budget, but I think that this is an example where a partnership approach within government in and of itself could look at how to better think about digitizing, closing the digital divide in rural areas, digitizing key public facilities, and then coordinating around which are the different services that could be provided around that. Next. So in our program with the Ministry of Villages, we quickly realized that the Ministry of Villages was not the appropriate agency to be looking at the last mile connectivity issues, and supported the ministry to reach out to their counterparts or their colleagues over in the Ministry of Communications to discuss how a partnership could be formed around the concept of smart villages. So with the Ministry of Communications focusing exclusively on the last mile connectivity and some of the issues around effective use, the Ministry of Villages could then focus much more specifically on ensuring equitable access to digital technologies, focusing on capacity building for effective use, and then focusing much more on coordinating different aspects of service delivery down to the village, leveraging the digital technologies. This has been a partnership that from the World Bank side, we've supported together with ITU, and we're hoping that in 2021, we would see the initiation of a pilot program in this area that would really emphasize the partnership aspects, both within the development partner community, as well as within the government, and then potentially also reaching out to the private sector. Next. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for your presentation. And now we are approaching to 1 o'clock, but still I want to have a short Q&A session. And we have a question in the chat box. And I don't read out these questions or comments, but I try to configure the essence of the question, maybe in a bit abstract way. That now we have 5 presentations, and each presentation emphasized the importance of partnership between private sector and public sector. So my question, a kind of general question, is that how you can establish a good communication channel, formally, informally, sometimes public comment, public hearing, but sometimes there should be informal way as an individual company or as an industry association. So the question is that what kind of communication channel you have or you are planning to establish, or is there any information you can share in that regard? So any like reaction? Anyone?
Kondo-san, this is CK from Axiata.
Yes,
give it a try. Yeah, well, the public-private partnership dialogue is very important for us as a private sector member. Of course, I'm very appreciative for policymakers and regulators who are transparent. They practice, or at least try to be transparent. They try to have discussions both from the formal side and informal ways with industry, because there's always what we call in this parlance called an information asymmetry. When you're the policymaker side, there are a lot of things you don't see from the public and from the consumer side in terms of the demand, right? The demand patterns, and but that data we have as private sector because we run and operate networks, so we are able to actually help share that kind of information with the policymakers. I'll give you a good example in Cambodia. Several years ago, when Cambodia was developing its USO program, similar to the one Bhakti is executing in Indonesia, they were starting new. And they were saying that how do we, so there's a pot of money they collect from the licensees. They want to know where to put the money, right, in which village or which rural areas. So normally if you're a policymaker, you have a rough idea where the population, underserved people are. We told them, actually in Cambodia, said, no, sir, why don't you do it in this way? Because when we do our marketing plan year on year, we will know roughly where the consumers' trends are shaping out to be, where there's a demand, right, where there's latent demand. So but these areas, because we can't serve because they're not actually commercially viable today, but they could be commercially viable in say a year's time, 12 months time. So to help bridge that gap, we tell the regulators in Cambodia, why don't you identify village X, Y, and Z, because although we are not able to sell them today, there is demand, please use the funds for that. So this kind of the two-way discussions help, because then the right money can be put in the right place for the right people at the right time. And we actually appreciate policymakers who keep the doors open for us and have a discussion with us. And of course, we try our best to make sure that the national interest in any market is always preserved and become the first priority for us. Thank you, Kondo-san.
Okay, thank you, CK. Yes, actually, the essence of today's presentations are that we have a common understanding that partnership is important. Also, we need to have the same kind of understanding and observation. So, of course, policymakers or regulators will not make like a so-called desk theory just exist on the paper. Of course, they need to reflect the actual situation. So I think the communication channels and such an environment, a dialogue between all stakeholders are quite important. And I think that is a message from these sessions. So is there any other like comment from a panelist? If you want to, yeah.
This is Barbara. I will, I will add also into that topic about, public and private dialogue, that the space where we are right now, that it's a digital space, and how fast it moves, it really needs to this multi-stakeholder approach and this multi-stakeholder dialogue. I think that it is not realistic to think that the government can manage without opening the doors to have conversations, but the other way around, right? I mean, as a private companies, we really need to understand what the government is seeing and what the needs and the gaps that they are identifying to ensure that we are aligned. Then I want to highlight that this is a digital environment that we have all seen how fast it moves, right? And we have all seen that this is truly now a puzzle where all the different pieces play a very relevant role, right? Then putting all those pieces together on regular basis for that dialogue, in my opinion, is the only way to be successful, right? I think that when we see some initiatives that have not been successful, probably it's because some of the pieces of the puzzle were not involved. And this is something to think about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. So with that terminology, let's pick up the multi-stakeholders dialogue from this session. So that is the takeaways from this session. And with that, I would like to conclude this session. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating. And also, I'd like to thank interpreters. I just noticed that there's an interpreter for English and Chinese, as well as captions. Thank you very much. And please join me in thanking all the panelists for this session. Thank you very much. So I will get back to Atsuko-san.
Thank you very much, Kondo-san, and all the speakers. They are very insightful and inspirational. Now we have more motivation to partner with all of you. So with that, we close the session 2A and move on to session 2B. And thank you very much, Mr. Kondo, for the very skillful moderation. It went very smoothly. Now, as you know, the expanding digital connectivity is at the heart of our efforts to bridge the digital divide in Asia and the Pacific. And for that reason, we have been tackling this topic from different angles. At the RDF, from the beginning, we started with a session on Pacific connectivity with private sector and member countries to discuss some of the key challenges. Then this morning, we had a session on inclusive connectivity. So we discussed different initiatives and how we can capitalize on the expertise and the activities which are emanating from that. Today in this session, we will discuss the affordable ICT in partnership with the industry, because without industry solutions and technology and expertise, this mandate cannot be achieved. On that note, we are very fortunate to have the digital leaders of Asia and the Pacific in this session to share with us their insights and their views and inspirations to all of us. And our moderator is from the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Thomas Abel, the advisor to SDCC and the chief of the Digital Technology for Development. So Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Atsuko. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for everyone joining. It's a very exciting panel as the topic is important for everyone right now. So we have 4 speakers, and I will just quickly mention who all our speakers are. We have Mr. George Samasoni, President, Pacific Islands Telecommunications Association, and the CEO of Fintel. We have Mr. Osamu Komamura, Vice President and Head of Spectrum Policy for SoftBank Global Spectrum Planning Department and HAPS Mobile. We also have Mr. Jorgen Arens Rostrup, the Head of Telenor Group Asia, and Mr. Bill Lan, Chief NBN Strategist of Huawei. So a very good balanced group, I think, of private sector folks to have us understand the perspective on how we can improve connectivity and actually work towards connectivity for all in a partnership way. And I think the key focus of this topic that we will get are, 1, what are the challenges? 2, what are the recommended interventions that we should focus on? And what kind of partnership models should we undertake? And we should have questions, room for questions at the end of the session as well. So I will hand it over to Mr. Samasoni to go first, and we'll go in that order and try to, if you can, Mr. Samasoni, try to limit your talk to 6 minutes then we'll have room for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Thank you for the opportunity for Peter to contribute to this ITU forum. Just a brief on PITA, the Pacific Islands Telecom Association. It's a non-profit organization formed to represent the interests of Pacific Islands in the field of telecoms. We have, at the moment, 208 members, including government and regulatory. As in the Pacific Islands, the pandemic has so far been contained in 15 Pacific Islands, apart from Fiji, French territories, Guam, and PNG, and just recently the Solomon Islands. And the effort to contain the spread has led to a significant reduction in economic activities, with the pandemic-induced global recession, trade, and tourism in particular, as small Pacific Islands are exposed to the external shocks. But if ever there is a need for connectivity, it is today. And amidst the pandemic, ICT holds great hopes for recovery and helping us to move forward with new approaches, which will also be essential for the fulfillment of the SDGs. And as seen in the Pacific, ICTs are literally keeping the world stitched together in the midst of this pandemic. COVID-19 crisis is serving as a catalyst for bringing about a paradigm shift in how we use ICTs in the Pacific, as the industry responds to a new work from home landscape. And it has changed the way we live, work, and connect. As from the first slide, the Pacific Islands population is around 12 million, excluding Australia and New Zealand. Internet users in 2000 were around 200,000. In 2019, the stats indicates it's close to 3 million users now. But this leaves 9 million unconnected, bulk of which is in Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea has a population of close to 8.5 million. And as seen, the PIC penetration is around 68%, though there are significant variances in the penetration rates amongst PITA members. And significant penetration rates could be seen from those with reliable international connectivity. Next slide, please. So the challenges for us, natural environment and topography, apart from the low population densities and external shocks, are the immediate limiting factors in the provision of ICT in the Pacific Islands. And as you're all aware of, the 15 most exposed and vulnerable countries in the World Risk Index, 5 are from the Pacific Islands. The consequences of digital divide are starkly relieved by the COVID-19, as those without broadband were unable to work from home, attend school lessons, or access health services. And ICT, mobile technology in particular, is the mitigator in the digital transformation of the Pacific Islands. Access to affordable broadband service is key to economic growth for the Pacific Islands. And as we've seen, broadband take-up increases, also increases income, and reports indicate that mobile broadband penetration of 10% increases GDP by 2.5%. Next slide, please. There has been progress in terms of universality and affordability of ICT networks in the Pacific Islands. Overall, PITA members are on track in its targets with mobile coverage around 90% and an average price of mobile data package around 5% per capita income. Internet penetration is above 60%, and the per capita income was an ITU PITA strategy from 2015. But digital skills and awareness are seen to add to the internet take-up constraints. And for PITA members, internet use in generally is high in secondary school age group and reinforced by the presence of computer labs and digital literacy, pointing to the importance in investing in education to bring more people online and offer new opportunities. Next slide, please. And as we've seen, technology continues to deliver greater network capacity and reduce the cost to consumers in the Pacific Islands, access to high-capacity international subsea cables, new satellite broadband services, upgrades in domestic infrastructure, new generation of mobile technology, 2G to 4G, 4G plus, and more affordable consumer devices. And for the Pacific Islands, 4G will remain the largest connectivity this decade, whilst 5G deployments, first in the cities, may be around the next 5 or 8 years. And the shift to mobile broadband and 4G also reflects the increasing rates of smartphone adoption. This is helped by the decline in smartphone prices and the emergence of new and low-cost smartphone vendors. Next slide, please. Most Pacific Islands have attracted significant public and private investments in subsea cables for their sustainable network infrastructure and international internet bandwidth. And as seen, deployment of subsea cables have been rapid. And MDBs recognize the significant lack of capital in the Pacific Islands for subsea cable connectivity, whereas the economic impact is immense. And these development partners have also insisted on open access to the cables they support in order to promote lower pricing apart from competition. Next slide, please. As seen from the map, 90% of PITA members in Pacific Islands will be connected to subsea cables by in the next 2 years, a significant improvement from just 4 island countries in 2000. And inclusive planning of recent regional networks has enabled the Pacific Island countries to obtain subsea cable connectivity through branching units, and also moves to interconnect islands through subsea cables. Next slide, please. The latest announcement in the second cable to Palau, again funded by MDBs, the US Agency for International Development, the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, and as seen, this is a massive coverage in terms of subsea cable. And while subsea cable connectivity resolves the first mile, the challenges ahead for the Pacific Islands will be the second mile in terms of internet exchanges, data centers, and the last mile, local access networks. This is apart from the strengthening of the spectrum, cybersecurity, regulation, and network database. Next slide, please. And satellite connectivity remains critical to Pacific Island countries, particularly during disasters, islands with limited subsea cable access, and the last mile. And like cable, there have also been a surge in satellite for the redundancy, and we've looked at technologies that are available now with the GEO, the MEO, and the LEOs, and this is including ITU's Pacific Island Connectivity Project, all in the push for reliable and affordable internet. So the challenge ahead for the Pacific Islands in terms of working with the industry and the government especially is the availability of sufficient and flexible spectrum. As you are aware, Pacific Islands need both satellite and the 5G to be in the global bandwagon. And collaboration in this, in the WRIC, is quite critical. And industry and government creating an enabling environment, including regulatory, that specifically enables connectivity and increased public sector partnership in non-economical areas. And governments need to be actively engaged, including policies and targeting broadband deployments, and must view the private sector as the enabling engine for ICT-driven nation building and sustainable development, and not as a mere revenue contributor to the national treasury. And lastly, regulatory, there has to be a level playing field. Policy decisions and regulations should ensure stability, predictability in the market to reduce barriers and keep overregulation at bay and encourage market growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Samasoni. Very good overview of the situation in very unique challenges in the Pacific Islands. So our next presenter is Mr. Kamamura from SoftBank and Haps Mobile. Go ahead, Mr. Kamamura. You're on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for giving this kind of opportunity to me. So actually, yeah, I'm now oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Sounds great.
Okay. So today I'm trying to introduce our activity of the HAPS, and then also the things like flying object in the stratosphere layer in the sky. My name is Osamu Kamimura, from SoftBank and also Haps Mobile. So next slide, please. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, yes, thank you. So yeah, I'd like to introduce firstly about my companies because there are some people who don't know about the companies named SoftBank and Haps Mobile. So SoftBank is nationwide mobile operators. One of those operators in Japan, and then Haps Mobile is a subsidiary of SoftBank, and also AeroVironment. AeroVironment is a US company developing the aircraft with cutting-edge technologies, and then having a professional experience to design and assemble aircraft. Next, please. This is just the agenda of the today's presentation. Next, please. The reason why the world needs HIPS. Actually, the HIPS is a very advanced technology, very new technology in the world. Next, please. So, like you can see here, the HIPS is just oh, next, please. Yeah. Actually, HIPS is just an abbreviation of the high altitude IMT base station. We already have the concept of hubs in ITU communities, like a high altitude platform station. But in the case of HIPS, we have kind of another concept, like the flying IMT base station in the stratosphere layer in the sky, and then providing the terrestrial IMT service on the ground. Next slide, please. So now you can see here in this slide the technology development. Like in IMT technology, we can see every 10 years, 3G, 4G, 5G, and the next one would be maybe 6G or something. Now we are at the moment of at the era of 5G, and then next, please. With this kind of technology development, we also discover some technical coverage method, like from picocell to the wider macrocell, establishing the tower on the ground. Next, please. But with this even with this kind of situation, we still have 3.6 billion people who don't have internet access in the world. Next slide, please. So maybe I think it's better to have another coverage method, which should be wider or larger coverage area, having such very good one, very effective, very efficient one. Next, please. If you think this kind of things, we tend to think maybe the coverage area provided from the sky would be very beneficial, very efficient. But next slide, please. In the case of satellite, direct communication with a regular user terminal, using a regular user terminal is really difficult due to the too long distance. Next slide, please. But in the case of the HIPS, it's possible. Actually, using existing devices, and also creating the coverage area like 200 kilometers in diameter. Next slide, please. We also have other reasons for choosing the stratosphere layer for the base station position. Like firstly, the in stratosphere layer, the window speed is very low and then stable. And then this is very, very good situation for having the flying object in the safely in the same position. And also another reason is this area, stratosphere area, is a unexplored area, undeveloped area. So there are not many even no flying object in this area now. So it's a kind of vacant area. Next slide, please. Furthermore, compared to the satellite, if we think about the latency kind of issue, using HIBS, we have a shorter distance compared to the satellite system. That's why we may have a lower latency, much lower latency in this kind of system. Next, please. So with this technology, we can have a bridge of the digital divide, and then also providing the stable network during even natural disaster situation. Next slide, please. In addition to those, we also can think 3D areas for drones or flying objects, and then also IoT, not only human beings, but also other things like animals, livestock, and then plants or farms. Anyway, all those things can be connected to the network using this kind of technology. Next slide, please. So next, I'd like to introduce our activities of HAPS Mobile. Next, please. We have an aircraft named Sunglider. This object, this Sunglider, has a very, advanced, a very good features, firstly, payload weight, up to 75 kilograms. It can bring. And then also the flight duration, over 6 months. Once we launch this aircraft, maybe this can stay in the stratosphere layer for 6 months. That is very amazing, that technology. Next slide, please. We already done the flight test, high altitude flight test, reaching to the stratospheric layer 2 months ago. And then in that flight test, we've already done LTE connectivity related experiments, various kind of experiments using the video conference, using Zoom, or those all things are successfully done. Next slide, please. This is a milestone of our project. After establishment of the rules and the regulations, including the national regulations of each country, maybe we can launch some commercialization. Next, please. Not only our company, but also other companies are also now interested in this project, HIBS Hubs. So we already have the international organization named HAPS Alliance, and then there are many famous companies are already joined. So if you have some interest for this alliance, you can check, on the website about various kind of information. Of course, you can join the HAPS Alliance if you like. Next, please. Next slide, please. So next, the agenda item 1.4 in WRC23. Next, please. So in order to utilize this technology, we need to use frequency band. Firstly, for feeder link. Secondly, for service link. For feeder link, we already had a discussion in WRC19 last year. And then we had an extensive discussion, and then we already had a identified frequency band for feeder link of HIBS, which is, for mainly hubs, but it's almost same. But for service link, we are now discussing in ITU community, ITUR. Next slide, please. This is a basic concept of spectrum usage. We are having this kind of idea. Now you can see HIBS service is a carrier's carrier. That is this kind of the idea we have. And then this service is under the umbrella of local MNO's mobile service. So which means IMT spectrum band assigned to local MNOs can be used for HIBS as well as a service link. And then all communications via HIBS will go through local MNOs network and will be subject to all local rules, including the national regulations in each country. Next slide, please. We now have the only 2 GHz band available in RR for usage of HIBS, but only 2 GHz band. We cannot get any flexibility for expansion of the HIVS service. Actually, each country has each situation, each company has each condition. So maybe it's better to have more frequency band for this project, like 2.6 gigahertz, 1.8 gigahertz, or 700 to 900 megahertz band. We are now discussing this kind of things, like for identification of the more frequency band in WRC23. So after this kind of identification, we can get some flexibility for expansion of this kind of service to the world. Next, please. In this slide, you can see the agenda item, which is specified like HIVS kind of the issue, agenda item 1.4, and then maybe you can see the detail in this slide, or from other information if you have some interest afterwards. Next slide, please. So this is a schedule for new regulations in RR. So in WRC23, we are expecting to have a new identification for the more frequency band for HIVS. Next slide, please. So this is takeaways for today's presentation. The HIVS concept is beneficial to the world in terms of bridging the digital divide and providing an interactive network during even natural disaster situation. Technology to utilize the stratosphere layer of the sky is already just around the corner. So in few next years, we can see that those, the technology is completely available. And then finally, activities concerning WRT23 agenda item 1.4 is really vital for the practical utilization of HIVS system in the future. Next, please. So this is on final slide. Before 1903, we couldn't easily predict mankind could fly over the sky. But now everybody realizes it's a norm. And of course, this development benefits a lot to our society. Before 1957, we couldn't easily predict mankind could launch a lot of artificial satellites and could get benefits from them like today. Now we are in the similar situation like 1903 and 1957, at least in 10 years from now. I believe the HIVS hubs would be a norm in our daily life and providing a lot of benefits to mankind. If you have any interest in this project, let's accelerate the movement of this technology in each aspect together. Next slide, please. So final page, next slide, please. So today's challenge will be tomorrow's normal. Thank you very much for paying the attention to my presentation. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kamimura, and it's a very interesting technology. I'm glad that you've actually launched it and starting to prove it out. And I agree, this is very needed to provide remote connectivity. So, and we will wait until the end before we open up for Q&A, just to make sure that we can kind of stack up questions. So if you have any other questions, we have one in the chat window already. So we will move now on to Mr. Arends Rostrup from Telenor. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Hello, Thomas and ITU. Thank you for having me and Telenor to participate in this very interesting discussion and interesting seminar. A brief introduction to Telenor would be that we are a multi-market operator group with operations in the Nordics of Europe and in Asia. Actually, 9 out of 10 Telenor customers comes from our 5 Asian markets. And it's an interesting market in Asia. In this region, over the next 5 years, and this is mind-blowing to me, 700 million people will start using mobile internet for the first time. However, this year, the pandemic has shown how important it is to bring connectivity to all. Indeed, we have a concept and an aim to connect people to what matters most in Telenor. And that has never felt more relevant and true than these days. Extending digital access in these challenging times has called for, I believe, close collaboration between operators and governments and also third parties, NGOs, and that needs to continue. With the growing reliance on the digital world and following a greater risk of a deepening digital divide, we need to make sure the learnings from this time are carried forwards. When we look for the hurdles preventing people accessing meaningful connectivity, I think there are two key elements to that. One is extending affordable access, and the other is addressing the mobile internet usage gap. It was commented on earlier, which currently stands for approximately 50% in our Asian markets. Next slide, please. We agree in principle with the Broadband Commission that basic internet services should be affordable. The Broadband Commission has called that no more than 2% of people's average monthly income. I let that be the Broadband Commission's position, but the principle we agree to. We can see that mobile data is making basic access to internet more affordable. However, equally important to minimize the digital divide, I believe, is access to the right tools, such as, for example, affordable smartphones. Let me use Myanmar as an example. It is an example of the difference access to affordable smartphones can make to bringing people more online. It has some close to 90% smartphone penetration, and I believe the result is 60% data users, which is a fantastic number in a telco market, a mobile telco market, which is only 6, 7, 8 years old. Another example is tools for various businesses and functions and activities, such as DTAC's Smart Farmer program in the neighboring country, Thailand. This shows the value to individuals and communities the access to internet and digital platforms can bring. We found that farmers using educational elements from the tool were able to increase their income by some 25%. Next slide, please. To help people access these tools and to understand the value connectivity can offer, we also need to support the development of digital literacy and skill set. Last week, I had the pleasure of hearing from 3 ambitious young women from Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Norway as part of Girls Takeover initiative run by Plan International. They emphasized a little bit with different language, with different examples, and from their home base and experience base, but exactly the same issues. The need to do more to include digital skills in education, and also to ensure young people get the training they need to safely access and get value from the digital world. The digital world that is actually literally at their fingertips. Providing this education and upskilling to a wider population and not to just those in school is of course also important. I will use one of our markets as an example again. In Pakistan, 49% of the population have access to smartphones, yet only 26% are connected to mobile internet. According to this year's, what they call in Pakistan, the Inclusive Internet Index, one of the bigger factors contributing to this in Pakistan is a relatively low level of digital literacy. In all of our markets, therefore, Telenor works to raise levels of digital literacy across the board. 2 weeks ago, we were delighted in Pakistan to join hands with the Directorate of Science and Technology to train 500 female entrepreneurs in digital skills. And this number comes on top of 750,000 people we have trained in safe internet in Pakistan over the 3 last years. Next slide, please. what steps are then needed to make real change in these areas? I need to start with the business environment, and with the business environment predictability, which is important for all businesses. And that continues to be important and very important for telco businesses. Mobile investments have tremendously long horizon and are all coming up front, as we know. In Asia Pacific, for the countries that have in many ways the lowest degree of connectivity, it is a big paradox to me that spectrum prices are among the highest, not only in Asia Pacific, but in the world. This is an issue we have to deal with together. Our mission to get everyone connected becomes very much harder if in the face of such disruption. And this can only be achieved if the connectivity is affordable. Next slide. For societies, the acceleration of digitalization means that the train is many ways leaving the station now. We need to make sure we don't leave a lot of individuals and communities behind. Making these critical services more affordable, I believe, requires a long-term view from governments, and also perhaps a recognition of the role that connectivity plays in enabling growth and innovation across different sectors and throughout the society. Today, digital cut across everything, changing the way all sectors operates, serves, and engage with people. So therefore, it's also time for us to move together with these dynamics in the formulation of policies and regulation that probably have traditionally been developed in silos and which today also need to cut across sectors, ecosystems, and value chains. I believe we need to take a broader perspective and bring down traditional regulatory barriers to unlock the next level of digitalization. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rostrup. A great perspective on the urgency to act now. I think while folks understand the urgent need. So thanks again, and we will now move on to our final panelist, Mr. Bill Lan from Huawei. Go ahead, Mr. Lan. The floor is yours.
Okay. Could you listen to me?
Yes, sounds great. Thanks.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's go for my presentation. Let's go to the next slide. So before I start my presentation, I would like to share a story of my Pakistan colleague. After the pandemic outbreak, employment of Huawei Pakistan was allowed to work from home. However, when he returned to his hometown in a rural mountain area, he found the nearest 4G base station is around 20 kilometers away from his house. To carry his duty, he set out a tent in the mountainside as his remote office and carry laptop and spare batteries back and forth between the home and the tent every working day. So let's go to the next. So what I want to mention is the digital connectivity issue has become the challenge during the pandemic. Take mobile internet, for example. The enablers of digital disconnection could be categorized as infrastructure, availability, consumer readiness, content and service, which require national strategy, smart funding mechanism, and the innovative investment model and the business model to ensure the availability and the sufficient of INT spectrum and the site density for wider coverage and the better quality of a mobile internet service. It is also require user with digital capability and affordable entry-level mobile device to access rich and the secure online content and the service. Next, please. Next one. Previous one. Go back. So the spectrum availability is always the international agenda because it is not only the full of the mobile industry, but also related to complicated issues such as spectrum licensing, occupation, reforming, as well as national treasury. An average of 549 megahertz out of 950 megahertz accounted for about 60% of harmonized mobile spectrum has been licensed for IMT in this region. However, IMT spectrum licensed in most countries in South Asia and Southeast Asia are still below the regional average. So we urge policymakers to accelerate the assignment of available IMT spectrum with clear spectrum roadmap for investment confidence. We also suggest to assign the 0 sub-1 gigahertz spectrum for LTE service, since frequencies such as 700, 800, 900 megahertz could provide coverage nearly 2.2 times wider than those of middle band. Better for rural coverage and the improving capacity and the indoor coverage for social and the economic recovery in the post-pandemic period. Next. So when we talk about the technology innovation, we always address orbiting cell lines, also called the stratosphere telecommunication system. In fact, innovation could be happen in existing telecommunication system. For example, how our innovative rural star solution enable carriers extend their mobile internet service 60 miles away from existing macro base station through so-called non-line of sight LTE relay transmission on 3 simplified and cost-effective relay sites. The technology could be flexible, operated in band or out of band based on carrier-owned spectrum resource and the service quality they offer. It enables carriers connecting a maximum of 9 villages with 500 to 3,000 population in an average of 50% cost saving. Next slide. So the site density is the important indicator for service quality of mobile internet. The average of site density in Europe is about 2 times higher than those of in Asia. It also reflects the low level of user availability and the site acquisition difficulty in Asia. The tower sharing by means of imposing infrastructure sharing obligation or regulatory incentive such as public subsidy and the spectrum dividends could encourage operators sharing their site resources. For example, the UK Ofcom provides spectrum-free reduction on 700 megahertz in exchange of tower sharing of each operator to lower site acquisition costs and promote competition. In a wide area, public direct investment on passive infrastructure is applied from FBB to MBB. And the active infrastructure sharing, such as rent sharing, has already piloted in several countries. Let's go to the next slide. So when we put much effort to bridge the network coverage gap in a rural area, it had better not to ignore the usage gap, in which network has already covered. In fact, the usage gap is more serious than coverage gap in a developing country. Compared to figures of 750 million people who are still not covered by mobile internet, there are still 3.3 billion people living within the reach of mobile internet, but without access to the mobile internet. Let's go next slide, please. So the reason for not using mobile internet can be complex and varied, including cost of not being able to afford the internet-enabled mobile phone and the service, lack of awareness of mobile broadband and its potential benefits, lack of skill in using the mobile internet. More effort to be done to stimulate the adoption and the use of mobile internet will make network penetration more financially viable. So Huawei is knowledgeable on the supply chain of handset manufacturing. So we bridge the carrier, distributor, local brand, and the OEM, ODM manufacturing to provide so-called carrier brand or distributor brands handset available from $10 to $50, which is affordable and tailor the demand of low-income users. So we also urge government to reduce the customer duty, GST, and the sector-specific taxes on entry-level terminal, which account for about 20 to 30 of the total cost of mobile ownership in some Asia countries. Let's go next. So lack of the skill and the large gender gaps are major obstacle to mobile internet adoption in the developing countries. Huawei, we have the so-called Tech for All initiative that enable people who live in the remote rural areas with digital capability to access internet. In Kenya, the ICT-equipped mobile classroom converted from shipping containers provided connectivity, digital training facilities, courses, and the teachers for women and the youth by partnership with UNESCO, Africa, GSMA, ICT Ministry, and the Safaricom. Similarly, 6 digital buses in 64 rural districts in Bangladesh have already trained 60,000 women since 2017. The base model innovation could make it possible to turn over the digital inequality. Huawei has already cooperated with OTT players and the local carriers to provide a rich and live important content to attract the unconnected users through resource sharing and the revenue sharing. The infotainment UGCs such as video sharing, social network, live stream videos, gaming on pilot. So the next step, the free access public generated contents in public service, education, and healthcare sector could be considered the anchor service for the rural connectivity project. This is the end of my slide. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lan. Very insightful on the points about the cost being the main barrier. And we have noticed this within the Asian Development Bank that, you know, coverage is still very important, but cost is the main barrier right now. And so first of all, I want to thank Mr. Samasoni for answering the question in the chat window, and hopefully that is fine for now. And we have just a few minutes for additional questions. If anybody has any, please raise them in the window or directly, but I have my own questions as well. One question, I think, given that I'm from the Asian Development Bank and we have the World Bank in attendance as well, we saw in the presentations that the MDBs have invested, you know, to try to help bridge that gap with submarine cables. ADB invested in the Pacific geosynchronous satellite last year, and we are supporting developing of new telco operators, and we're now even working to include fiber bandwidth in rights of way for other types of infrastructure like power and water and transport. And I wanted to ask, you know, we have a new priority. You know, our president is talking about connectivity now because of the pandemic, that it's really become such an upfront issue. From the folks in the panel, what would you say would be the programs that we should focus on now that we have a renewed focus on connectivity, and we've had success in undersea cables and even satellites? Where do you think the pandemic would point us in terms of our new investments that we should be looking at? And I guess I'll start with Mr. Rostrup, if you want to answer that first, and then the other folks can too.
Yeah, I'll have a shot at it, Thomas. I think first of all, it's important for us all to note the complementary role the MDBs have together with private sector, governments, and others. So the role is important, and then it is about how we all play out our roles and how well we collaborate where we can and should collaborate. Obviously, the MDBs have also a big critical role to play in funding global development projects, which eventually lead to the sustainability or sustainable development goals. So I assume we take that out of the equation. I mentioned policies and in my address, Thomas, and I believe that policies continues to be a critical element underpinning the digital connectivity growth. So maybe from the perspective of MDB programs, I will encourage enabling policy frameworks to attract private investments and motivate governments to the holistic perspective they need to have on how they develop not only their telecom agenda and their technology and the education agenda, but the digitalization agenda, which clearly goes across and is a common denominator through several other agendas for societies.
Great, thank you. That's insightful, and we do have a focus on policy, but this connectivity policy is quite complicated, and we have more work to do there. So that's great. Then the next question I want to ask is, now that we have this new priority based on the pandemic, I think really has just put it in the front of everybody's minds. Have you seen changes? We heard from the previous panel before this from Indonesia that they've done things to accelerate their connectivity. Do you have examples of what governments have done or private sector partnerships that have been created already due to the pandemic that we can leverage in other countries? And maybe I'll go to Mr. Lan. If you're focused on you mentioned affordability. Have you seen things that have been done since the pandemic that we could learn from?
I would like to say this. Unfortunately, I never see any government-driven projects who encourage the private sector investment during the pandemic periods. In fact, from our observation in this region, carrier investment priorities during the pandemic has more focus on so-called connectivity and a social device, which is driven by working from home and learning from home. So you can see the fixed wireless access is growing extremely strong, since it can easily connect and install without the physical touch. So we can see it's the so-called carrier-driven investment a lot, but we just see some policy or maybe some support from government, but didn't see the action.
Great, thank you for that. Very interesting. And I also mentioned that we have seen governments distribute laptops and mobile access points to families for children's education. And of course, the operators are ramping up their network bandwidth to support all of that. Do you think that government action is something that we can learn from? Even here, where I'm currently in California, I think California has handed out 100,000 laptops. But I don't think they're going to plan on continuing that after the pandemic. But do you see a model where governments could fund some direct support for the bottom of the pyramid, in order to solve part of the problem? And I think especially your point with the low-cost devices, this becomes more, more accessible.
So this question go for me?
Oh, go ahead.
Yes. Yes, so what we could do is develop a new technology with the low cost, and also try to provide an affordable device which is maybe not manufactured by Huawei. So we can contribute is because we know the value chain, so we know another supplier. So we would like to align with the carrier with so-called some OEM or ODM suppliers in China who can manufacture in the so affordable device. That's what we can do. And we also seen some policies action from government is because something like the spectrum, the release of spectrum, the progress is have be accelerated. So that's why we can see, because if the spectrum is affordable and if sufficient, maybe and with a reasonable price, maybe the carrier will be happy to invest.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I want to ask Mr. Kamimura regarding the new technology, stratospheric, drones that you were talking about. Have you seen more interest in this technology now with the pandemic? More investment, or are you seeing that because of the pandemic has diverted investment away because they're focused on the economic crisis?
Actually, in this kind of situation, under this kind of COVID-19 situation, for example, actually, we are facing that, we are realize that, the connectivity is really, really important, right? So for our life, actually, before we are, we don't use connectivity compared to now. We don't use the connectivity a lot compared to now. But now we are realizing that the connectivity is really kind of the very basic infrastructure in our life. So which means actually still, as I told you, there are so many people who don't have internet access, internet connectivity, which means actually we need to more expand the connectivity. Of course, not only the, how can I say, technological kind of things, but also the economical kind of situation. Also, we have to support those situations, like expanding the connection, expanding the coverage area, and then also this kind of activity makes some competition, and then such competition cause some affordability in the future. So anyway, how can I say, making this kind of connectivity as a norm would be very important thing for us now. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's very important. Adding more elements of connectivity to drive competition is great. Let's do one more question from Mr. Samasoni. I wanted to ask you, as the Pacific Islands, you have a fairly low usage rate for internet, and I wanted to ask, compared to, say, Myanmar, which has in a very short time brought so many people online with smartphones, and the Pacific Island nations are obviously much more separated. It's much harder to get the connectivity, but even in places where you have the dense population, you haven't been able to reach the high levels of internet use. And I wanted to ask you, is there a model that you think could work, a public-private partnership type model where, where new forms of business models like the ones mentioned, in this presentation about, maybe combining e-government services or e-commerce or, social networking, where, it kind of all goes together rather than just a regular telco model with a monthly price for service and a cost of a device. And I want to ask if you've seen any of that in the Pacific Island nations, because with the density you have and the wide range of cultural applications there, it seems like more challenging. So any inputs on that, Mr. Samasoni?
Yes, in terms of PPP, that is the collaboration between the private and public sector, and in the PICs, the government's very much involved. When you look back to your question of remote education, in the Pacific Islands, whilst we don't distribute devices, governments work with the private sector in terms of subsidizing national TV access for education to the most vulnerable, especially with this COVID. There's import tax and VAT reductions as well. And there's partnerships in terms of public Wi-Fi and hotspots. And in addition to telecenters in schools and the added incentives in removing telecom levies to carriers and the promotion of competition, thus the reduction in data prices. And the PPP continues in terms of technology, as mentioned, not only cable, well, that's the first mile, it's how you take it out from the cities to the rural areas, and the other technologies come in, especially with satellite now with the LEO and the MEOs coming in.
Great, thank you. So our time is up, and I want to thank the panelists and all of the participants for joining us today. And I will now hand it back to Mr. Ashish for the next section in the agenda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abel. We are now into session 3, and this session 3 is dealing with digital services for development, digital development. And I have the honor to invite Mr. Alex Wong, Senior Strategic Advisor, Telecommunication Development Bureau, ITU, as a moderator to moderate this session. So, Mr. Wong, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm myself calling from Geneva, and it's a pleasure to be on the screen with you and to moderate this third panel. I can see that we're just going full speed ahead here and rolling into the next session. So this session, it's titled Digital Services for Digital Development. And I think we all know that the ultimate goal of connectivity and having all the right pieces in place is to have the right applications and services. And that's the only way we really achieve meaningful connectivity and really achieve the social economic gains that we're all looking for as countries evolve. And so this particular panel, we sort of constructed it a bit as a foundation and going step by step on how can countries approach the achievement and implementation of digital services to achieve their development objectives. And how can this model be sustainable, and how can we take this on a step-by-step approach? So we have 3 panelists who are going to be with me on this particular session. I'll introduce them right now very briefly, and then we'll get into each of their presentations. So the first colleague is Hani Eskander. Hani is my colleague at the ITU. He oversees the Digital Applications and Services program at the BDT. And he'll be talking a bit about the foundational enterprise architecture layer that governments need to be using to build eventually the digital applications and services they need. We call that the whole of government approach. So he'll explain what that is and how that could work in the region. I'll then give an overview of the GIGA initiative. One of the roles I play at the ITU is I also am the lead on the GIGA initiative with UNICEF. And this is an initiative to connect every school to the internet. So I'll give a bit of an overview of that. So this is the layer that sits above the foundational enterprise layer, if you can think about it that way. And then we'll move to Vincent Huerta from the UN CDF. He'll start talking about applications and services. So this is of course, what sits on top of the enterprise layer, the connectivity layer. Then what are some of the applications and services? And I know Vincent will focus in particular on digital financial services as an example. And then finally, we have our colleague from the Asian Development Bank, Sebesh Bhattacharya, who brings the money. He's, of course, ADB. We all know their role as a key investor and a financier of connectivity. And he'll sort of wrap up the panel with his views on the financing, starting with the core submarine cables, but moving on to some of the other areas that ADB is looking to invest in. So we'll do this where each panelist will begin with roughly 7 to 8 minutes. I think Hani gets a bonus extra couple minutes. I'll watch the clock carefully. We'll all do the presentations then, and then we should have some time for some questions and answers. So with that, I'm going to invite Hani to kick us off. So Hani, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. I'm going to talk about digital service for development, but really focusing on this concept of whole of government in investing in digital technologies, and why this is becoming a critical approach to adopt if we are really needing to scale and accelerate the digitalization for the SDG. So next slide. Just maybe to recall that there is a very strong linkages between the services and applications and this concept of digital transformation. And I'm here referring to a paper that BDT published. And because digital transformation at the end of the day is the adoption of those types of services and application that will fundamentally change the way the government and private sector and business services are designed, planned, deployed, operated. And from a citizen perspective, really, if the citizen doesn't see any change in the way they receive a public service or the way they learn, the way they receive healthcare through digital technology and digital services, they will not really experience what they hear about the potential of digital for transformation. Digital transformation at the end is not a technological initiative, is really a change initiative at the system level. And with the objective, of course, to reach the SDGs. So the big question is how we can approach digital transformation. How can we use the digital services to achieve the SDGs? And this is how I'm going to also highlight some of the things that ITU and particularly BDT can support in this process. Next slide. So now, as we all know, the SDGs are really becoming the framework that really guides countries to think about what do they want to see in terms of change and transformation in their society. And this is interpreted in the development of several types of digital strategies. We see, countries developing their digital health strategies, digital agriculture strategies, learning, commerce, etc., etc. However, if those different digital strategies are implemented in a complete siloed manner, we might run the risk of having a huge fragmentation, that those services will not be able to interoperate and they will not be able to deliver the type of systemic change that is really needed and really create the experience that the citizen will need to see and will not be able to make the information flow between different government services, etc. So it will be quite siloed and quite discrete, and of course we'll have a lot of duplication of effort and a lot of loss of investment. So there is absolutely a need for a digital government overarching umbrella or strategies that really adopts a whole of government to make sure that we end up by having a common infrastructure. Very much we look at the connectivity that it should be used by everyone. I think now we need to also think that we need to see a digital infrastructure layer that is also common and shared across different types of sectors, different types of departments, and this will save enormously in the investments needed and also ensure the interoperability. So we are going to say a few words about how ITU can help in designing those types of strategies, but also designing and bringing those strategies and implementation through this whole of government approach. Last point I'm going to touch base very quickly is it's not enough to have services, but also we need to bring those services to be able to be used by everyone, particularly those who are in rural areas. So that's why I'm going to highlight a little bit what we are doing in the concept of smart villages or smart islands or smart communities and what kind of guidance ITU can provide for that. Next slide. So in terms of steps actually and process, usually you would definitely have a digital strategy that highlights your priorities and highlights, based on your current assessment of the current situation, etc. But in many cases, we see that countries are struggling to implement those digital strategies. And as I mentioned, particularly that those strategies might run the risk to end up with a lot of discrete and isolated and siloed applications. So that's why the concept of digital enterprise architecture comes as an extremely important step to interpret and translate your digital strategy, which is at a high level, into much more concrete, specific system requirements and specification, but that deals with the enterprise as a whole and not with a one standalone solution. The digital enterprise architecture really provides 8 different types of architecture that really explains how your applications will work together, not one application, but your portfolio of application, and what are the applications that are shared and how they can be shared, and how you are going to secure, and how you are going to integrate those types of enterprise systems, and really taking the discussion at a system level as opposed to a solution level. And this is a practical tool to implement a whole of government approach, which I think it's becoming not a buzzword, not a luxury, but really a must if we are really going to establish and accelerate the digitalization of services, particularly in countries where you have limited resources. The result of the digital enterprise architecture, when it is implemented, what you can call a digital platform. A digital platform, a digital application platform, is basically a set of applications that work together, and where you can plug and play additional types of services and innovations on top of this platform without having to reinvent the wheel and without having to duplicate, and making sure that those services will be interoperable. So ITU has developed tools that can help in those 3 steps, how to develop your strategies, and how you go about building your architecture, and how you go about implementing your digital government platform. I'm going to touch base very quickly about some of those tools. Next slide. The first tool that we have developed is this SDG Digital Investment Framework. It's a very simple concept, but I think it's quite a game changer, because what we did is that we looked at different types of SDGs, agriculture, health, education, etc. And then we looked at a large number of digital services and use cases that are implemented across those different sectors. And we came up with a set of what you can call building blocks, like identification, like security, that are very common. And the idea is that if you are able to make those building blocks common across all sectors, then you have saved significantly the effort and investment, and you avoided duplication, but also you ensured smooth information flow, and you can accelerate really the digitalization, where each sector don't need to rebuild the back-end systems again, but they can rely on this type of platform. Next slide. So we have identified candidates or examples of those building blocks, which I'm listing on the screen now. Some of them are very core, like identification, security, information exchange, etc. Some of them are common applications, like for example, e-marketplace, e-learning, etc. And our approach is to say, if governments are able to put in place some of those building blocks as a shared infrastructure, this will accelerate significantly the uptake of the digitalization in different sectors at the same time. So you invest once, but you use for many other different types of sectors and use cases. On the right side of the slide, I'm just taking a screen capture from the India Enterprise Architecture, Agile Enterprise Architecture document that really adopted this concept of building blocks, and they have explained how you build up your core digital infrastructure in waves, what kind of building blocks you would do in wave 1, and then wave 2 and wave 3, based on your priorities and based on your needs. So this is one of the tools that ITU has developed with a number of partners, and now we are developing additional tools on how to go about building all the other types of enterprise architecture as a way, as I mentioned, to interpret and translate your high-level strategy into something that could be implemented, systems that could be implemented, but in the right integrated and interoperable manner. Next slide.
Hannah, you have 1 minute left, please.
Yeah, sure. To facilitate the development of the platform, we have launched recently an initiative with Estonia and the GIZ and German government and DIAL to create a reference implementation or a model of a digital platform based on these reusable building blocks. So this will be an open source type of resource where you can see how a mini government platform could be built that really put in place all those types of building blocks, how you facilitate information exchange, how you secure this exchange, and how you integrate identity and all those types of core building blocks to really build your government platforms. So this is an initiative that we just started, and we are really inviting others to join. Next slide. Maybe at the last point I would like to mention is this concept of smart villages, which is an implementation of a whole of government approach where you serve a whole community using the same infrastructure for a rural digital transformation. Next slide. So it's about this, how you bring meaningful connectivity, but to serve several SDG at the same time. And we have developed some guidance that it's a blueprint that you can consult. Next slide, where you can get some insights about how, next slide as well, where you can build your smart villages to make sure that your digital services will be accessible in rural and remote areas. So the blueprint is available, and it all brings together like a suite of tools that build on each other, adopting this whole of government approach to make sure that we are maximizing the return on digital investment, which we think will accelerate the digitalization and scale up of digital service. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you, Hani. So Hani sort of took us on a voyage that began with the very fundamental architecture layer within the ICT. And I think that's often not paid enough attention. So I think it's really great to use that as our foundation. And then of course, gave some examples of how that applies already in the region with the Smart Islands work. So I'll present next, and I'll continue on this, building on Hani's layer on the enterprise architecture layer with now connectivity. You need connectivity before you can move to the applications and services. And so this particular presentation will be on the GIGA initiative. And we know that some of you in the region are in discussions with our colleagues in the ITU on how we can launch a GIGA initiative. So the mission of GIGA is to connect every school to the internet and every young person to information opportunity and choice. Next slide. I think we can skip the next one. That's about how most people need to be, are still not on the internet. So let's go to the next slide. So when we conceived of GIGA with UNICEF about a year ago, it was officially launched. It was based on the fact that we have a fair number of new innovations in the last few years that make this ambitious initiative of connecting every school to the internet doable. First and foremost is we have a lot more innovative financing instruments and mechanisms. And of course, it's all about, in all kinds of development areas, how can we attract new sources of investors to development, and in this case, ICT connectivity and specifically school connectivity. So we originally even modeled the GIGA initiative off of some of the sophistication that Gavi, the Global Anti-Vaccine Initiative, introduced, but we want to build on that. There's a lot more innovative mechanisms and risk mitigation mechanisms that we feel can attract new sources of money if we're going to connect every school on the internet at scale. The second thing, of course, is there's been a lot of evolution in connectivity technologies, which make options more cheaper and easier to implement. We have ways to also increase accountability now through technologies like blockchain, as an example, where we can track if the connectivity is being used. And finally, the focus on schools. Even though GIGA is about connecting every school to the internet, we believe by doing so, we're creating the framework or the foundation for connectivity to every community, every citizen in the country. But schools are measurable, they exist, they can be, we can use satellite technology, such as this example in Colombia, where we're using machine learning. We can identify schools that maybe even the government doesn't know where they are, and we can map what is the connectivity to that school, so we know exactly where's the gap. And if we have the information, then you can create a package around that. So that's some of the innovations happening now, which allow GIGA to work. If we go to the next slide. And so really, ultimately what GIGA is, using the platform of the UN, of the ITU and UNICEF, we want to connect, working with our partner countries, the funders and supporters of connectivity, ultimately to the communities and the citizens and the students, and also bring in the providers, all who have different solutions that can contribute to the element that is needed if you're going to have meaningful school connectivity. Next slide. And of course, with ITU and UNICEF working together, we feel that we deliver the best of two key organizations that would be very relevant to school connectivity. Of course, the ITU with our regulatory and technical expertise, UNICEF with their expertise in dealing with the children and their in-country presence in almost every country in the world. And of course, on top of that, using the convening power of the UN to work together and bring in other stakeholders, and then, as I mentioned already, introducing some of these innovative financial instruments. Next slide. So how do you engage with GIGA? Well, we have a methodology that we've developed. It's published in our recently released working group on school connectivity report on the digitalization of education, which is referenced at the end of this presentation. But we start by working with countries to first identify and map where every school is located, and then together with the global community and with the country, build the needed financial models. Public and national level financing is absolutely critical to this as well. This is not about a philanthropic exercise, but it's about creating sustainable financing models. We then make sure that the connectivity solution is done so that it's sustainable and it's a fit for purpose solution for the situation. And then that foundation allows us to deliver on the Empower pillar, which is really the applications and services. Next slide. So the methodology that we use in a little more detail is we have a very simplified view of what we call our 11-step methodology. Again, repeating the fact that we start with the mapping and resolving information gaps. That's steps 1 to 4 in the orange. Then we need to look at the situation in the country itself in terms of improving conditions to investment, which is steps 5 and 6. Then put together how do we make the implementation and the financing work. That's steps 7 to 10. And then finally, how do we then complement and use all that connectivity to create the sustainable business models that will maintain that connectivity? So that's where we get into the empowerment pillar or the applications and services. Next slide. So where have we been working so far? The original focus of GIGA, we wanted to begin small and start in 3 regions of the world, and that was Africa, Central Asia, and the Eastern Caribbean, Central America. So you have those countries represented on the chart here. The grid shading shows a bit of where we are in each of these countries. Lighter meaning we're just beginning the activities, darker meaning we're making some good progress. Again, just to reiterate, this is a partnership with the country. The country needs to be driving and owning this process ultimately. And there are, of course, a lot more conversations now beginning with other countries and regions that are interested, and in particular, I know in the Asia Pacific region, with our ITU colleagues, there are a lot of conversations going. Next slide. So the last couple slides is just some reference materials, which you're welcome to look at. This is the report that I mentioned that we published with the Broadband Commission on school connectivity under the title, The Digital Transformation of Education. And this lays out the framework of MAP, Finance, Connect, Empower, how that works. Lots of case studies. A lot of the information, by the way, on GIGA is also available on our website, which is gigaconnect.org. So this report was recently released, and I would welcome you to look through that report. And there's also a very nice video, which I don't think you can access through this link. I guess if we share the presentation, you can access the video as well. And then the final slide is just a reference to the fact that GIGA, we are really working hard to integrate this into all of the UN structures. And GIGA right now is one of the key ways forward in the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation under the working group of universal connectivity. So we feel that's a really important point to note, because for countries and for partners that are on this call, making sure we're working together and integrated within the UN framework is really critical. And we're really looking forward to advancing that work as we progress. So I'll stop there. And again, just in terms of the structure of how we've been presenting to you, we've again started with that enterprise architecture view from Hani. I've talked a bit about a connectivity initiative that we have launched globally, really with a focus on delivering sustainable connectivity using the schools as the base. And now I'll call on our next panelist, and I'm pleased to introduce or reintroduce again Vincent Weirda, who's currently taking the role of the regional coordinator for Asia for the UN CDF. So Vincent will now keep us moving along that spectrum and start talking about some of the digital applications and services. Good. So Vincent, over to you.
And yeah, thanks for the introduction. I mean, we all talked about it already directly and indirectly, I think, in sections, the importance of really leaving no one behind in the digital era. We all know that the pace of change is very fast and has actually been sped up, if anything, through the whole COVID pandemic. But it does not take away these fundamental challenges. And, you know, UNCDF therefore has also a vision, as it says in the next slide, to really promote inclusive digital economies that leave no one behind. So a big element of that is how individuals are able to use innovative digital services that can enable their own lives and help them to achieve the SDGs. Next slide. UNCDF is the United Nations Capital Development Fund. One area of work really focuses on local development finance, subnational development finance. Another involves inclusive finance, financial inclusion, but really also linking it more broadly to inclusive digital economies. And when one looks at how this still is a massive opportunity, and listening also to the previous presentation on connectivity, I think it goes without saying that there's a lot that still can be done in terms of accessing the services that these, let's say, digital rails provide as opportunities for individuals. Next slide. So UNCDF adopts an inclusive market development approach, which really looks at how we develop digital economies with all parts of the economy, including the public sector, but also keeping really in mind the private sector and the role of private sector investment as key drivers of moving this forward. And specific sectors that we look at, because they have immediate high links to the digital space, are finance, agriculture, energy, education, health, and transport. Next slide. We also look at UNCDF into particular client segments. So if you look at the right-hand bottom corner of where there's a circle, key segments that we focus on are women, youth, migrants, refugees, and also a category of micro and small enterprises as specific segments where we wish to really push this digital inclusion for. And the four work streams that we use to really promote this, and I think this also links with the previous presentation and the one forthcoming, is having empowered customers, so people who can actually make wise choices about services they access, to have inclusive innovation, so to really foster an environment where innovation and new business models can thrive. An open digital payments ecosystem, so where you have interoperability, so different platforms can talk to each other in seamless ways. And ITU, I think, is also very much promoting this kind of thing. And then finally, which was also mentioned before, the key role that policy and regulation has to play, and where many countries, especially LDCs, are really looking for support and technical know-how in order to make wise decisions about putting the ecosystem in place. Next slide, please. So just being aware of time, there are three specific examples that I want to very briefly discuss. And actually they're in the slightly wrong order. I will start with Fiji because I think that's the sort of the basic mobile money model, where people are able to send and receive money very simple using a feature app phone. So it's a very simple way in which people can immediately send and receive small quantities of money and hold certain values as a sort of mobile wallet that they can transact with. And this has really made tremendous changes in terms of, access, convenience, safety, where cash, involving, as you may know, vast, distances and kind of very remote, difficult to reach location have all a lot of issues that digital can, of course, overcome. Not only that, but it has also contributed to more gender equality in the society, where women are more able to control resources through the mobile wallets that they own or access or can send money on only. And this, really promotes control and privacy, and are major elements in terms of an SDG impact on gender. Now, of course, this basic way of payments then allows one to access services. So actually the third example, I think, is a good follow-on, which is on energy, for example, where companies are leasing solar home systems, and people are repaying that, amortizing that over the time with mobile payments. And companies that are using this kind of model have a centralized ERP system, which allows them to disable a system if people are behind on their payments. But on the other hand, it's a very flexible approach which can take account of people's income streams and seasonality, and therefore allows pay plans that really are very much more flexible than traditional sort of credit products from banks, and allow people to access different services, including energy and others. Also, what it does is allows us to analyze patterns of payments from people in a big data sense, where one can also then build credit profiles of individuals based on airtime use and basically the paying of certain services. So this big data then also allows us to fine tune what services can be provided to individuals. And this all comes
That's
together.
just about 1 minute left, Vincent.
Yeah. Then this all comes together in value chains where you're now able to really look at bulk payments for large groups of people through these payment solutions. You can look at how to more smartly manage your business, for example, through inventory management, and you can connect to markets more effectively that allows people to really sell when the prices are right. Next slide, please. In the PowerPoint, you can see there's a link, and I'd really encourage you to have a look at that, because that really involves a lot of specific initiatives that we have supported with UNCDF that are COVID response, and that really highlight how digital has taken off in this pandemic phase and will very much continue to do so, and covers all kinds of sectors, including remittances, healthcare, delivery services, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please, and final slide. Another thing that I want to highlight is CDF is promoting an inclusive digital economy scorecard, which seeks to really measure the level of inclusion of individuals in a digital economy. And we've already launched this in several countries, as you see on the slide. Again, there's a link where you can find out more. But this really aims to show how individuals can link through products and services to the digital economy. Thank you. Over.
All right, thank you, Vincent. So our last panelist from the Asian Development Bank is Subesh Bhattacharya. So he'll talk a bit about how ADB is supporting ICT development in Asia Pacific. So Subesh, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I just wait for the slides to come. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, very good.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk here. Can we move to the next slide, please? Let me start with a little bit brief information on ADB. We were founded in 1966 and having 68 member countries. So as a multilateral bank, we are owned by these countries, and there are 49 countries within Asia and Pacific region, out of which 37 are borrowing country, means they are eligible to receive financial support from the bank. We provide not only the financial support to our member countries, but also we produce knowledge product, which is very localized in content so that we understand the local issues better than anybody else. And also we help the countries to create effective partnership with other stakeholders to bring more leverage to financial support. Can I move to the next slide? It's a long list of countries that we have, starting from all the way to Georgia in the west to the Cook Island in the east. And importantly, we also have 40 local offices that helps us to be close to our member countries and understand local context better. Next. We have been in this investment or support, financial support, almost more than 50 years, but in the digital infrastructure, we are pretty new. But why into digital infrastructure especially? At the beginning of this century, we could see that digital technologies created significant impact on the overall world economy. It created economic benefit, employment opportunity. In fact, some of the sectors that we are seeing created because of digital technologies only. For example, the call center businesses, especially in the Asian region, then the companies like Uber, Facebook, they cannot survive without digital technologies. And our member countries, especially in the Pacific region, they wanted to leverage this digital application to bring economic development to their countries. But when we looked at the environment to promote digital application, we could see the main challenge is their connectivity. They were still on satellite connectivity, which is very costly, and only very select few can afford to have internet connection. So we thought of, okay, first to overcome this challenge, we have to really look for a solution. And as you know, in the digital technology environment, fiber optic cable is the most reliable and cost-effective long-term solution for bringing reliable connectivity. So we started looking into the opportunities to invest in the fiber optic cable. And our first project was approved in 2012 for Tonga. So that and then we have a number of investment in submarine cable infrastructure. Next slide, please. And you could see there are a number of submarine cables that we have invested in so far, starting from Tonga, then we have Palau, and so many. Most of these cable systems are up and running now. Latest one was that Manatua cable system connecting the Cook Island. It became operational sometime in July this year. And now there are two ongoing cable systems. One is connecting the Christmas Island in Kiribati, and one is for Nauru. So we are hoping in next 2 years' time, all our member countries in the Pacific would be connected through submarine cable infrastructure. Next slide. Submarine cable connects one point to another. So technically, there is no as such challenge in implementing a submarine cable project. But as a development partner, we are not looking at the profit or just connecting this particular islands or particular country. We are looking at the development impact, and development impact will only come when the internet becomes affordable, and there would be application of this internet for social service delivery. To make sure that affordability is achieved at the end of investment, we looked at various options, and whether it is bringing down the cost of capital or bringing down the operational cost, involving private sector, bringing up efficient social service delivery at the end of the investment, and so on. So to mitigate, to achieve all this goal, there are different challenges we needed to encounter. Next slide, please. The first of all was to minimize the capital and operating cost in this cable investment. So we adopted different models. So if you look back at the different cable system that we invested in, there are different way of connecting each country. For example, in Palau, we waited for the CUS cable to come alive, and then Palau can connect to it. It could save a significant capital cost for that country, and that indirectly helped them to achieve better retail cost or wholesale cost at the end of the day. In some other cases, what we encourage these countries to come up with a regional approach. Instead of individually going and connect to the nearest international cable hub, they formalize a kind of consortium bringing 2-3 countries together, and that thus they could share the capital cost as well as the operating costs, again indirectly helping them to bring the wholesale price, internet price, to a minimum level. We also looked at the policy and regulatory environment. In most of the Pacific countries, the policy was weak in terms of internet usage and internet access, and the regulatory environment more or less non-existent. We all know regulator plays a major role in getting the optimum price or the best possible price, especially when the environment we only have 1 or 2 incumbent operator in that country. It is more important for regulator to have a look at the pricing and have some kind of monitoring process to make sure the actual user is getting optimum price. With this cable infrastructure, now these countries have access to enormous bandwidth. How exactly they are going to utilize it? That is also we needed to think while doing the infrastructure investment, because unless this bandwidth is properly utilized, you don't see the economic development or anything as such on the ground. Next slide, please.
You have one minute.
Yeah.
Sebastian.
Okay, I'll spend 1 minute on this. Now, what next with all this investment already done? We still have many small islands to be connected because the main cable landed only in the main island. So there are isolated islands with some population who are still having access either through satellite or not having any access. So that would be also a priority for us. Once these countries are connected with the cable, they are completely dependent on the internet in some of the cases, their day-to-day life. So any cut or any disruption in the service causes a lot of problem to their business, to their basic communication and all. So resilience cable would be something we would be interested in, but again, there would be consideration in terms of looking at the impact and how exactly they're utilizing the current system. Domestic connectivity, again, important because landing in one point, if the other point of the country is not having access, we would be also looking at possibly supporting to bridge that gap. And the most important part of the applications, rolling out the application to leverage this connectivity would be something of our interest. We already started e-government initiative under a technical support program. We are assessing the e-government environment right now, and then so far we have done it for Palau, we have done it for Cook Island, and then we'll be looking at other interested member countries. E-education would be something very important, something like you mentioned, Alex, that GIGA is looking at connecting the school infrastructure. We would be interested in that to provide any support if a member country is interested. Digital island is like what you mentioned as a smart island or smart village. We are in talk with ITU to understand the details, and if there is any opportunity, we would be more than happy to support the government to roll out this kind of initiative. With that, I'll stop and happy to answer any question that you have.
All right, thank you. I think I need to wrap up because we have to move to the next session. Maybe I would just suggest a few final thoughts. First of all, for all of our participants, I think we're really grateful to our partnerships or emerging partnerships with UN, CDF, and ADB. And I think hopefully you can see the package that I think the 3 organizations can offer, and we all sort of play a role in doing that. So I think part of this panel was to show the different pieces. And I think also on behalf of our colleagues in the Asia Pacific region, at the ITU. I think we've gone on, we've started some really great conversations with both organizations and how we can work together. So I think that would be the first point. The second point is more technical, which is I've been looking at the chat. I don't see any questions. Since we have to move to the next session, though, if anyone does have questions, please put it on the chat. And I hope we took together with myself, Hani, Sabesh, Vincent, we can respond via the chat if there's any questions. So with that, I'm going to pass back to my colleagues. I think, Sean, you're going to take the floor for the next session. Thank you very much, everyone.
That's right. Thank you so much, Alex, and also all the other panelists, Mr. Sibesh Bhattacharya from ADB, Vincent Weirda from UNCDF, as well as Mr. Hani for the very engaging session and very informative one as well. And now I would like to welcome all of you to the next session, which is the Cyber Safety Post Forum session, launching of the 2020 Child Online Protection for the Asia and the Pacific. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, and it's my pleasure, my privilege to welcome you today. And before we start with the presentation and the guideline, I just would like to welcome all of you to this session and perhaps give you an introduction on today's session. Just like to start with today's session with a quote from a child who said to me that as a young person, I believe that protecting children on the internet should be one of the most important priorities for ITU. And bearing these words in mind and looking at some statistics, seeing that with over 4 billion people, 71% of whom are 15 to 24 years old, and 1 in 3 children connected to the internet, children's lives are being shaped behind a screen, and it becomes even more clearer on why child online protection should be one of our priority. And so on that note, I would like to first invite our, because due to technical difficulties, we are unable to have 2 of our panelists at the moment, but they will be joining us as soon as possible. So in fact, if it's possible, I would like to begin this session with inviting our panelists first to begin the session today. In order to discuss the importance of, such holistic approach to child online protection, which covers all risks and harms for children online, which we will look at 2 different elements in today's session. So first 2 panelists today that will be intervening under the title, first, promoting a multi-stakeholder approach to adopt a global behavior in local context. This will be presented by Ms. Ella Seri, who has joined us today, who is the Assistant Manager of International Strategy and Futures at the Office of E-Safety Commission. We also have Mr. Anil Raghuvanshi, founder of President of Child SafeNet Nepal. And then we will, in the second part, we will be looking at involvement and engagement and effective measures to cooperate and coordinate in all relevant stakeholders on COP. And on that, we have Ms. Rizky Amelia from the coordinator of Digital Literacy Program from ComInfo Indonesia. And then also my pleasure to introduce Ms. Shanta Arul, who oversees the strategic policy initiative, industry development and relations for Netflix across the Asian Pacific region. And then after that, we will be handing over the floor after the panel session to our guest of honor, which is Mr. Stephen Bureau, Deputy to the BDT Director, who will be sharing his remark with all of us with regards to child online protection, and also an introduction by our colleague Fanny and also Carla, who will be introducing the detail of child online protection in the region, in the Asia Pacific region. So before opening the panel discussion. I would like to, I think now on that regard, if I could first invite Ms. Ella Seri, Assistant Manager of International Strategy and Futures of Office of the eSafety Commission, eSafety Commissioner, who will be sharing with us insights on Australia's involvement in the revision of the guidelines. On on one hand, and also concrete policy support at the regional level. All this while highlighting the importance of regional and global cooperation on COP within their multi-stakeholder approach. Ella, if I can hand over to you the floor.
Thank you very much, Sean. Just checking that people can hear me loud and clear. Great. Hello to everyone on this call, distinguished guests, panelists, and the team at the ITU. It's a pleasure to speak to you today at the regional launch of the ITU's Child Online Protection Guidelines. And how brilliant is it that we can all connect in this virtual manner? I think 2020, with all of its challenges, has shown us that we can use the internet as a force for good, keeping us connected to our friends, families, work, and the services that we need. But for all the benefits of connectivity, there are also a variety of risks and threats. Disturbingly, we've seen an increase numbers of children being sexually exploited online during the COVID-19 pandemic. As a country with high internet penetration, a survey that we conducted in May revealed a dramatic increase in reliance on the internet, along with disturbing findings that 4 in 10 Australians had had a negative experience online during the first few months of the pandemic. Sorry, Sean, can I just check? I think the slides are on we're not quite on the right slides. I think we just need to go back to the start.
Apologies for that.
No, it's no problem at all. I can keep going and then just let you know when to change onto the next slide. Perfect, thank you. But look, despite these challenges, most Australians viewed the internet as an important or essential service during the COVID-19 lockdown, particularly for paying bills, banking, accessing news and information, and staying in touch with family and friends. So COVID has really highlighted the role of the internet in our lives, in all of its glory and in all of its risk. But even before COVID, our research found that 81% of Australian parents are giving their preschoolers access to the internet through a connected device, with 42% providing access to their children before the age of 2. Now, more than ever, it's clear that countries need to assess their child online safety policies and strategies to both put protections in place, but also prevent problems before they happen through education and proactive change. Next slide, please. So the 2020 COP guidelines were launched at an important time, and it was my great pleasure and privilege to work with the multi-stakeholder team led by the ITU to develop the guidelines for policymakers and the guidelines for educators, parents, and carers. All 4 guidelines highlight the importance of a multi-stakeholder approach to child online protection. It's a model that we've adopted here in Australia, spearheaded by the eSafety Commissioner. For those of you not familiar with eSafety, let me first give you an overview of what we do and how we do it. Next slide, please. Established in 2015, eSafety is the world's first government agency solely dedicated to the online safety of its citizens. We focus on prevention, protection, and proactive change, and coordinate online safety efforts across government agencies, law enforcement, industry, civil society groups, educators, parents and carers, and children themselves. Australians turn to us for help, knowing that we can investigate serious online abuse, help with removal, and hold perpetrators to account. We have a range of civil powers to compel takedown of illegal or harmful online content, whether it's pro-terrorist material, child sexual abuse material, image-based abuse, or serious cyberbullying directed at a child. I should emphasize that we're not a law enforcement agency. Rather, we're a regulator working in tandem with law enforcement, but focused on content takedown. It will not surprise you to know that we are busier than ever. We've seen rates of image-based abuse, child sexual abuse material, and cyber abuse increase as the world congregates online during COVID-19. In addition to our regulatory powers, we also focus on prevention through awareness raising and the provision of evidence-based resources to help Australians have more positive, empowering online experiences. Our content is tailored to specific audiences to reach children and young people, all the way up to seniors, educators, frontline domestic violence workers, and a variety of at-risk communities. I'm proud to say that in the past 5 years, we've reached millions of Australians with our education resources and training. We also undertake extensive research to ensure our programs and resources are evidence-based. Importantly, as part of our multi-stakeholder approach, we develop resources with communities for communities. Our research program and stakeholder engagement process equip us with the insights and knowledge we need to understand online safety issues so we can design, implement, and evaluate the best possible solutions. However, the actions we take to support individuals are only part of the picture. Next slide, please. The digital world should be built with children's safety in mind, with safety settings, processes, and provisions built in rather than bolted on. We call this safety by design. Since 2018, eSafety has been championing our Safety by Design initiative, which sets out realistic, actionable, and achievable measures for industry and provides a suite of tools and resources to support them to protect and safeguard users online. Safety by Design has received strong support from those industry stakeholders consulted, and this work continues to gain momentum and support both in Australia and overseas. It's great to see the spirit of Safety by Design reflected in the ITU's guidelines for industry. Safety by Design is not only an example of a cooperative, consultative approach to user safety, it also makes user online safety a shared journey between industry, government, and the community. Next slide, please. But moving beyond Australia, we know that advancing online safety is a global effort. There are no borders in the online world, and cyberspace doesn't require a passport. That's why international collaboration and engagement is so critical. We need to collaborate strategically, locally and globally, as we address the normative forces that shape and guide the development of the online world. These are digital ethics, governance, and regulation. Of course, these fundamental principles are approached differently depending on a nation's history, their culture, and societal norms. And while we know that the internet is global, the laws governing it remain local. We need local solutions that recognise diverse cultures, communities, languages, and experiences that make up our region. Nevertheless, as more countries move to address child online protection, it's imperative that legislation, governance, and national online safety strategies are internationally aligned and that a high standard is set. The COP guidelines provide a solid foundation for this work. Next slide, please. Australia is a strong supporter of the ITU's work in the development sector and has been an ITU Council member since 1959. Our voluntary contribution to the ITU through the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications is used to fund demand-driven capacity building projects in the Asia-Pacific region. One of our current projects, developed with the ITU Regional Office in Bangkok, focuses on building child online protection capacity and is being delivered in 5 Asia-Pacific countries: Afghanistan, Indonesia, the Marshall Islands, Myanmar, and the Philippines. The project aims to provide guidance, develop and disseminate national guidelines, build human and institutional capacity, and raise awareness of the need for child online protection. Next slide, please. Alongside this work, eSafety is sharing our experiences and information on our unique model with governments and organisations in our region and around the globe. Our vision is that one day there will be a network of eSafety commissioners, just like there is a network of privacy authorities that work together to address shared issues. In our region, we have a long, strong history of working with NetSafe in New Zealand, and in recent years, we've seen Fiji establish its Online Safety Commission. We're excited to work with our Fijian counterparts and forge a unique Asia-Pacific approach to child online protection and online safety regulation. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, while there are significant challenges facing all of us in child online protection, one thing remains vital, that we keep meeting these challenges together and finding collective solutions. We all have a role to play, governments, academia, NGOs, and of course the tech platforms themselves in making the internet a kinder and more hospitable place and a safer place for children. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about e-safety, whilst also discussing the multi-stakeholder approach to online safety and child online protection in Australia and our region. If you'd like to learn more about e-safety, please visit esafety.gov.au or send an email to international@esafety.gov.au. Thank you, and I look forward to the rest of the presentations and to your questions. I think you're muted, Sean. Apologies.
Thank you so much, Ella, for your presentation, the comprehensive first contribution to this today's panel. I just would like to take this opportunity to inform everyone that we are very fortunate to already have Mr. Stephen and also Fanny, who is already here to join us. So on that note, I would like to take this opportunity to be able to invite Mr. Stephen, who is the Deputy Director of BDT, to deliver his remark before we continue again with our panel session as well as information on child online protection. Stephen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon, Sean. Thank you. Don't worry, I have problems with my job title as well sometimes. I try not to say it if I can avoid it. Thank you for accommodating me. It's a nice chilly morning in Geneva here. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone on the session, and thank you for joining us at the session. I was just very much enjoying listening to the presentation a moment ago. But this session is critical. It's a significant part of our activities, especially in this COVID-driven world. So thank you for joining us at the launch of the 2020 Child Online Protection Guidelines for the Asia and Pacific region. Digital technologies have broadened the opportunities for children and young people to communicate, connect, share, learn, and access information, and to express their opinions on matters that are important to their lives, their future, and their communities. As the internet and mobile technology becomes more accessible among the younger community, it also poses significant challenges to children's safety, both online and offline. The ITU's very first set of Child Online Protection Guidelines were issued more than 10 years ago as part of the Child Online Protection Initiative launched by ITU in 2008. The world has changed significantly, amazingly, in the last decade. This multi-stakeholder initiative that brings together more than 80 partners and representatives from all sectors relevant within the child online protection global community to help create a safer and empowering online environment for children and young people around the world could not be more important than it is right now. In response to the growing challenges coming from our ever-evolving digital landscape, rapid evolution of digital devices, networks and platforms, ITU's membership has requested a comprehensive update of the COP guidelines back in 2018. That today, the COVID-19 crisis has further underscored the importance of keeping children safe, as more children are now coming online for the first time, many at a much younger age than their parents might have originally planned. And in addition to that, they now rely on digital devices and platforms for learning and communication due to COVID lockdowns. We've heard firsthand from our distinguished panelists a moment ago about how this pandemic has impacted the work that they're doing in Australia, and how these challenges are being handled. In ITU's revised COP guidelines, we've broadened the scope of child online protection principles, keeping in tune with current use of ICTs amongst children. Online gaming, AI technologies, robotics, and connected toys, as well as the special situation of children and young people with disabilities, are some of the areas that are covered in the guidelines. The recommendations included in the new guidelines also strive to strike an important balance between the need for protection and the need for greater participation through the empowerment of children. These 2020 guidelines are designed to serve as a blueprint that can be adapted and used by different countries and stakeholders in a way that is consistent with their own national and local customs and laws. ITU hopes that with the introduction of these guidelines in the 6 official UN languages, they will have a wider reach in our community. And I also hope that more and more governments will continue supporting this effort by translating the guidelines into national languages and adapting for local cultures in order to reach as many children, families, and other relevant stakeholders on the ground. The launch of these guidelines for the Asia-Pacific region represents a further step toward engaging all relevant stakeholders, governments, the private sector, parents and teachers associations, and the children themselves in discussions about how we can implement these guidelines on the ground and how we can include targeted measures and actions to create a safer online environment. It is our hope that these updated guidelines will serve as an effective tool to make solid, tangible, and rapid progress in child online protection, while ensuring that children's rights are always considered and included in program design and policy implementation. Bearing in mind the strong interlinkage between children's rights and the UN Agenda for Sustainable Development, we hope that these guidelines and their implementation through ITU and its partners will contribute to the realization of all SDGs, especially SDG 16.2, ending all forms of violence against children by 2030. As the UN agency specialized in ICT, we take this role as a global convener and facilitator seriously. However, we cannot do this alone. I call for all stakeholders to join us and thank all those who've already joined us in this effort and come together to discuss, identify, and implement solutions toward building a universally available, open, secure, and trustworthy online environment where children can thrive. Before I conclude, I reiterate ITU's continued commitment to supporting our members through our headquarters and regional office in bridging the digital divide whilst ensuring the online safety of our children, now under the COVID-19 pandemic and for future generations. We look forward to collaborating with you all in championing this effort in the region. Thank you, and I look forward to listening to the rest of your deliberate discussions at the panel. Thank you very much. Back to you, Sean. You're muted, Sean.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for the very comprehensive opening remark of today's session. It's a pleasure to always have you here, and for already touching upon so many of the key issues that we will be discussing here today. It's my pleasure to have this session handed over to a colleague of mine from the ITU from ITU headquarters, Ms. Fanny Rotino, who is the COP coordinator for ITU. She will be taking lead in this discussion alongside introducing all the other panelists and also introducing the ITU COP 2020 guideline to everyone. So on that note, it's my pleasure to please invite Ms. Fanny Rotino, who will be moderating this session from now on. Ms. Fanny, the floor is yours. Apologies, excuse me, everyone. Just some technical difficulty. I will bring her online now. Thank you. Fanny?
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you can hear me and see me fine. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and apologies for the technical problems due to the current situation. It seems that even for us, it's not always obvious to connect in due time. So I would like to thank you all for attending today's session on the presentation of the Child Online Protection Guidelines in Asia and Pacific. Thank you very much, Stephen, for your opening remarks. Thank you, Sean, for opening the session. And thank you, Ella, already for your first contribution. I would like to start with the presentation of, or just a very brief outline, because I know we have already entered into the topic, but outline of today's session, which has the title From Commitment to Action on the COP guidelines as a tool to implement a multi-stakeholder approach on child and protection. As a first part, we had already our first panelist, who was Ms. Ella Seri from the Safety Commission in Australia. As a second intervenant, we will have Anil Raghuvanshi, founder and president of Child SafeNet. The second part of today's session will focus on the involvement and engagement and effective measures to cooperate and coordinate with all relevant stakeholders. Here we will hear Ms. Rizky Amelia, coordinator of Digital Literacy Program and Common for Indonesia, and Ms. Shanta Arul, who oversees the strategic policy initiatives, industry development and relations for Netflix. Thank you very much for joining us today. Before entering again into the panel discussion and have a more in-depth look at the regional context, I would like to present to you the 2020 COP guidelines that we are here to launch today in Asia and the Pacific region. Please note that this presentation that we are showing today, alongside with all the different sets of guidelines and the related material, are available in all official UN languages. And here in the chat, we will share with you the Chinese version of the presentation. As was already mentioned, the first guidelines on child and protection were released in 2009 with the ITU COP initiative, a multi-stakeholder initiative that was launched in 2008, 1 year prior to this. In light of the rapid development of the information and telecommunication technologies, ITU member states specifically requested the update of the ITU COP guidelines. The request was expressed during the Plenipotentiary Conference in 2018 and is highlighted in Resolution 179. In 2019, then, 10 years after their first publication, the ITU COP initiative and partners reviewed the original guidelines in a truly multi-stakeholder joint effort. And the new, rethought, redesigned, and rewritten versions of the COP guidelines are the result of the dedicated time and extensive passion of a working group of more than 50 organizations that contributed to the revision of the text and bringing their expertise, experience, and research finding. I would like to highlight this because it's one of the examples of a successful cooperation at the global level. The COP guidelines, next slide, please, consist of, next slide, please, 4 sets. We have guidelines for policymakers, industry, parents, and educators, and children of different age groups. To give you a first overview, I would like to show a video now that will provide you with the key elements that are highlighted in the guidelines. Please, let's show the video. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sean. Looking a bit more into detail of in the content of the guidelines, I would like to give you short abstracts of the content of the different sets. Moving to the next slide on the policymakers' guidelines that propose the proposed concrete steps in how to develop a national strategy. Next slide, please, Sean, on the policy guidelines. Thank you. in order to respond to the global challenge, which needs a global approach based on harmonized and inclusive national strategies on child online protection, the guidelines propose concrete recommendations on developing a national strategy. Proposing ways how to recommending that the state should promote the use of ICTs in preventing and addressing violence, such as the development of technologies and resources for children to access information, block harmful material, and report instances of violence when they occur. To face the global element of the challenge of child online safety, the guidelines propose ways for governments to facilitate the communication between the relevant entities and to cooperate openly to eliminate harm to children online. The next slide, please. The guidelines on industry focus on all kinds of risks and harms, as we do in general or globally in the approach on child online protection, and highlight good practice of industry stakeholders that can be considered in the process of drafting, developing, and managing business child online protection policies. As having a major responsibility not only to help promote awareness of the online and safety agenda of the wider community and to provide a channel of participation and engagement for young people, but also, and even more, by offering safe and secure online experiences throughout their services, industry plays a key role in possessing the technological knowledge that policymakers need to address and understand in order to develop sustainable and effective COP strategies. As such, the guidelines for industry focus on key areas of protecting and promoting children's rights and propose very concrete steps within these areas for different types of industry, how to protect children and empower them online through their platforms and services. At the level of parents and educators, next slide, please. The guidelines highlight key recommendations for parents and educators and emphasize the importance of open communication and ongoing dialogue with children, creating a safe space where young internet users feel empowered to raise concerns. Different recommendations here, among others, a few highlighted. For parents and educators, of course, as I was saying, the open discussion create a trustworthy relationship, but also consider whether filtering and blocking or monitoring are of relevance, identifying the technology, devices and services across the family, and so on and so forth. For educators, more the focus on ensuring that all devices and platforms and connections are secured, that there is a policy which details how technology can be used, and ensuring that internet feed provided by the school is filtered, among other recommendations, as I was saying. The last set of guidelines for children, next slide, please, has been created in a child-friendly format and adapted to different age groups. Children have been crucial to the development of these resources, having significantly contributed to the shaping of their content and layout. Adapted to 3 different age groups, next slide please. The resources create an opportunity to learn about and strengthen young people's digital skills and knowledge, helping them learn ways to manage online risks, while at the same time empowering them to exercise their rights online and engage in opportunities that the internet presents to them. We have here created 3 resources: a storybook for children under 9, highlighting 6 different areas for consideration or that are relevant for children of that age group. A workbook that is accompanied by a teacher's guide for children 9 to 12 to be done in the classroom and discussed with an educator. And a social media campaign for children or young people 13 to 18 years old, discussing a different issues relevant for this age group. Next slide, please. Leading over to our discussion, I would just like to quickly outline that we at ITU will work on concrete implementation of the COP guidelines together with our partners to support the development of sound COP strategies and roadmaps, and to raise awareness, build capacity, and share knowledge in order to make child online safety a reality. Thank you very much. Now I would like to move again over to our panel. Thank you. We can close the presentation, Sean. I would like to move to our panel and turn to our speakers. Thanks again, Ella, for outlining already the efforts undertaken together with Australia by ITU, and the first contribution that was so comprehensive. So the work that you've been presented to, that we're doing together in the 6 different Asian Pacific countries to support the development, adoption, and implementation of COP strategies and effective measures is one example of successful cooperation and of the implementation of the guidelines. One element I would like to highlight here is the importance of child participation to these processes. In order to create effective and targeted measures, we believe that children must be involved, not only in the creation, development of COP-related policies and practices, but also in their implementation and monitoring. Child consultations are a first step and will therefore become part of our policy assistance in these countries, broadening our scope to ensure meaningful connectivity as a first step, which will include safety as a key element. On this note, I would like to invite also participants and attendees to share best practices and the projects in the chat for all attendees to see and for us to better understand where we can tap in at the regional level. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Anil Raghuvanshi, founder and president of Child SafeNet in Nepal, to share with us some COP-related mechanisms that are already in place in the region and how the guidelines will support these, strengthening the importance of adapting the guidelines into user-friendly additional tools and resources to support the development of digital skills and literacy for children and families. Thank you very much. Over to you, Anil. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fanny. Congratulations on publishing such a comprehensive and very useful guidelines on child online protection. And I'm sure that we all will benefit very much from what you have done with this wonderful work. So today, in my presentation, I would like to talk more about the local initiatives in Nepal, the local challenges, the gaps, and how we can make best use of the COP guidelines to work with multi-stakeholders. Let me start with my presentation here. Can you see the slide?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Please go ahead.
So as I mentioned that I'll be talking more about the multi-stakeholder approach and how we can use this at the local level. Before that, I would like to give a brief introduction of Child SafeNet. This is a fairly new organization working to make the internet safer for children and young people in Nepal. So we have been working as a global network member of different organizations like ECPAT International, We Protect Global Alliance, and also as a global research advisory group member of Sexual Violence Research Initiative, and also a reporting portal partner of Internet Watch Foundation, and the National Secretariat of Safer Internet Day, National Curator of Stop Think Connect, and also a CSO member of End Violence Against Children Global Partnership Program and NetSafe New Zealand. And when we work as looking at the guiding principles of children's rights, like they have right to be protected offline and online. So it's not only offline, they also have equal right to be protected online, and they have right to use the internet safely. And they have right to information, education, privacy, and recreation, again, online and offline, and also to express their opinions, their views, and also to make decisions on the matters affecting them. So these are the guiding principles of children's rights when we work on internet safety and also their better access to internet. Now I would like to highlight some of the internet-related data as well as the risks in Nepal. Nepal is now becoming quite, the internet is getting quite accessible in Nepal and also getting quite cheaper. So it's about 77% people of Nepal have access to broadband internet. And many of them, about 57% of them are using on mobile devices. And about 1/3 of Nepali people are using social media, particularly Facebook. And after the lockdown, the crimes against children and young people, particularly, the cyber crimes have increased very, it's like 172 cases in 1 month, which was like half of last year's total cases. So it was about 48% of the cases. And the 106% the online sexual abuse and exploitation source of after the COVID-19 outbreak also has affected Nepal. And in 2019, NECMEC reported more than 63,000 cyber tips from Nepal. In 2020, there are reports of even higher number of tips from cyber tips from Nepal. And in the first month of lockdown after the COVID-19 outbreak in Nepal in April, in the month of April, we conducted a nationwide survey together with UNICEF. And some of the key findings were on the screen time of children and young people. So out of 4 children and young people, 1 of them use the internet more than 10 hours every day. And the internet use more than 4 hours a day is more than 83%, whereas before the COVID outbreak, it was only 46%. And 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 10 boys receive hate speech and sexual messages, photos or videos online from their online friends, the strangers or total strangers they don't know. And 1 in 3 female and 1 in 2 male children, young people, they say they visited sexual sites, despite the government has banned all the sexual sites in Nepal, even for adults. And there's some gaps we have identified. That's like we don't have enough research studies and data to understand the situation in Nepal, about the vulnerability, about the risk, about the situation, and also the awareness is very low. There are people who think that they know everything, but they don't know even very simple things. So it's like they have some basic understanding of using the internet. Even they don't know how to use the password, change the password or make the password stronger, or making other things to make their internet safer. So awareness is very low, and the efforts for making more people aware is also very low. The government's effort is also very limited in this area. Although there are some laws in place, but the law enforcement is very weak, and the existing laws don't adequately address the issue, particularly on the issue of online crimes against children and young people. There are some policies made. Those policies and directives are on paper and it looks good, but those are not implemented or not used effectively. So some of them also need amendment. For the children and young people who suffer such harms, there is no or very little support system. There is no support system in terms of the psychosocial support for children who are affected by say cyberbullying or gaming addiction, internet addiction, or like a sextortion. So response mechanism and support systems are not adequate and weak. And we have been working regardless of all these things and the very little support from the government as well as the other organizations. We started to work from our own area, using our resources and building partnership with different organizations. we conducted some studies, like with UNICEF, we did conduct a study of a survey on COVID-19 and child online protection. And with ECPAT Luxembourg, we have actually completed a study on live streaming of sexual abuse and exploitation. And Child SafeNet had also conducted a study on online behavior and risk. And we conducted a comprehensive desktop review of all the laws, policies, research reports, and all the literature available on child online protection in Nepal. And based on the literature, based on the interviews and focus group discussions, we developed a white paper on child online protection that can be used for advocacy, awareness, program planning, and to develop capacity of service provider. Again, with UNICEF, we developed 4 toolkits, one for police on child-friendly investigation of online crimes, and one for the lawyers on providing legal aid services to children and young people who are having difficulties to take the cases to the court or report the cases. And psychosocial service providers are also, they will also be benefited from one of such toolkits. And one toolkit is for the parents and the caregivers. Similarly, we have also developed a cyber safety booklet. A child-friendly version is also being developed in English and also in Nepali language. And for awareness raising, online and offline activities are conducted, mainly using the social media, mainstream media, and events, and child safety training of trainers, training in schools, colleges, advocacy with the government, ISPs, and private sectors. We have been working. We're trying to develop such relationship with the different actors in Nepal. Some of the activities, some highlights I would like to show in pictures. We had conducted researches mostly by self-administered questionnaires, using such questionnaires filled by the participants, and International Girls in ICT Day together with Nepal Telecommunication Authority, and Safer Internet Day we have conducted in 2018, 19, and 20. And awareness raising video, we have developed awareness raising video on online grooming, on online abuse, so involving children and young people as the actors. And also training of trainers for children and young people in schools and colleges. And also we have partnered with Internet Watch Foundation to promote the Nepal reporting portal to report sexual abuse images and videos. Then we conducted awareness raising activities at infotech stalls, which were quite popular in Nepal, and also different events in the schools and colleges. And this one, one of the recent activity is developing comic strips and also disseminating to the children and young people has been quite popular. So we are exploring how we can use this in other languages apart from Nepali. And the priorities are, we need to develop a multi-stakeholder working group. We're working on this with government, UN agencies, INGOs, and advocate for increased budgetary allocation from the government and other stakeholders. There's very little or no budgetary allocation in this area. Develop and strengthen and implement policies and enforce law. Adapt the COP guidelines to make it more user-friendly, like short videos, comic strips, leaflets, social media posts, and raise awareness on ITU guidelines, tools, and resources on child online protection. And for this, we are looking at different people and organizations have different roles. As the child need to be aware of his or her own protection online. Then the family comes in the picture to protect children in the family. And communities, schools, CBOs, child and youth clubs also have a role to play in protecting children online. And civil society, ISPs, media, private sector, they can also have very big role in developing such a protection mechanism together with the stakeholder group, multi-stakeholder group. And the police, judiciary for law enforcement, and government and lawmakers for developing policies, laws, and making budgetary allocation, UN, Interpol, regional bodies for making international and national interventions. Then there's some recommendation based on this. We have, like I already mentioned, like the idea of e-safety like mechanism of one government body to address online safety. We have been working with National Child Rights Council to work on this, and also to create an effective system for reporting of crimes together with police, and with the ICT companies to filter and block online sexual abuse and exploitation materials, restrict children's access to such sites, and detect and prevent online sexual abuse. And for the schools to develop and implement school-wide cyber safety policies, and use protocols and codes of conducts for online classes, and for the NGOs to develop and conduct cyber safety training and awareness raising activities, and for the UN as agencies like provide technical assistance, support government and NGOs in program implementation, and for the families, parents, and children to learn about online risks and include the context of online classes and the COVID-19, and also spend one-to-one time with children and help them to use the internet safely. Listen to children and do not blame for being abused or exploited online, and also develop safe online habits, spend more time offline. That's all. Thank you. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer. And also, we can also have more one-to-one discussion and communication by communicating to our email address here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anil, for these concrete and forward-looking contributions. And it's great to see that despite the great challenges that we face, there is indeed wonderful and immense efforts that are taken forward at different national and also the regional level. To all panelists, please, if I may ask you to consider the time and stick with the 8 minutes that you have been given. I would now like to open the second part of today's session that will focus on the effective measures to cooperate and coordinate with all relevant stakeholders. We will be looking at different stakeholders in particular, discussing the involvement of children into policy-making processes and the engagement and commitment of the private sector. I would now like to give the floor to Ms. Rizky Amelia, who is coordinator of the Digital Literacy Program at Kominfo in Indonesia, and who will present another government entity here today, sharing with us the benefit of a holistic approach to implementation of comprehensive strategies and roadmaps to child protection, including the involvement of children, teachers, and parents in educational programs, teaching of digital literacy and collaboration with law enforcement as well as the private sector. Ms. Rizky, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanny. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a great pleasure to be here with you today. I hope we all stay healthy and happy also during this pandemic. My name is Rizky Amelia from Ministry of ICT Indonesia. Allow me to brief you the update of Indonesia transforming how to strengthening the collaboration for child online protection. Next slide, please. So based on the results of survey released by We Are Social in 2020, the number of internet users in Indonesia reached 1,075.4 million. So this means that around more than 64% of Indonesia's population is connected to the internet. Of the total users, around 15.3% coming from children under age 13 until 17. Also, we can see the big five in using social media in Indonesia. There is Instagram, WhatsApp, Twitter, YouTube, and also Facebook. So On the screen, on the left, we have data statistics handling negative content from MCIT Indonesia. This is the data until December 2019. But this is our general data recap, which includes all online crime cases such as pornography. So the pornography is for adults and children, and online gambling, fraud, child abuse, hate speech, etc. So which are already blocked by the Ministry of Communication and Information. Next slide, please. So this slide will show us about Indonesia's ICT infrastructure landscape. Regarding infrastructure development, we have deployed at 349,4042 kilometer length of fiber optic backbone across the archipelago together with the private sector. So in the middle mile layer, we already have fiber link network, microwave link network, and 5 national satellites along with 4 foreign satellites in support. So this layer support both mobile and fixed broadbands in the last mile layer. So we already built 479.125 BTS to uphold the mobile broadband network. Next slide, please. So as I previously slide, I already explained about the Indonesia internet penetration and also the infrastructure of Indonesia. So now the slide will tell about the acceleration of national digitalization. So on the top of this prompt response, Indonesia aims to broaden the digital transformation process in 4 sectors. For the first is, like I already said, information and communication technology infrastructure development. And the second is, we can see on the screen the eminent digital talent improvement both in quality and entity. There is technology development policy. And also we have the passing the primary legislation in communication, informatics, and data protection. And the last is to strengthening the international cooperation on digital economy and cross-border data flow. So we believe that these 4 aspects are foundation to help us rebound economically and also to become more resilient in the ever digitizing world after COVID-19. Next slide, please. So here is the legal framework in Indonesia. But at this time, Indonesia doesn't yet have specific policies regarding child online protection, but the several existing regulations include child protection laws, pornography laws, information laws, and electronic transaction. All of these regulations are more or less already includes to protect Indonesian children in cyberspace. So Indonesia doesn't differentiate whether it is adult pornography or child pornography. So this law prohibits a person to own or distribute, sell, and produce the pornography content. So at present, MCIT it is on the stage of discussing the draft regulation personal data protection with the Parliament. And in one article, it also mentioned that the children personal data is specific data that must be protected by the state. So next slide, please. So here is our comprehensive strategy to child online protection that MCIT Indonesia is committed to carry out a massive, comprehensive, and systematic top-to-down approach in maintaining a healthy internet ecosystem in Indonesia. So the top part of upstream level is to strengthening digital literacy and education awareness and development of human resources. So we collaboration with National Movement Digital Literacy on Cybercreasi and also the Community of Indonesian Child Online Protection. And the second one, or in the middle stream level, so we continuously and keenly promote about child online protection program and also digital literacy program through the empowerment and supported by the local community and also all our multi-stakeholder partner. And the last is then at the downstream level, we collaborated with the national police, once we got the cases on the internet, such as insulted or pornography, hoax or children cases, and need that investigation. So we hand over to police national for those who procedure to contribute or disseminate malicious content that violates the law for law enforcement. So the main of the comprehensive strategy for our cyber ecosystem in Indonesia is we want to increase the number of positive content on the internet. Next slide, please. So here is the explain about the how we collaboration with our multi-stakeholder in the upstream. We have digital awareness. So our partnership, ID COPE or Indonesia Child Online Protection, is fully supported with 14 stakeholders, including MCIT and Ministry Empowerment Women and Children. And the other is Cybercracy Multi-Stakeholder is supported with 100 stakeholders, including also MCIT, civil society, academics, private sector, journalists, digital platform, and so on. So there are 5 pillars in the cybercracy, like a digital parenting, digital economy, digital society, and etc. There is to keenly promote digital literacy to become an essential part of the ICT curriculum, informal and non-formal educational institution. Next slide, please. So in the middle stream or empowerment, we have a program, a digital literacy collaboration with multi-stakeholder, such as Smart School Online, with collaboration with the Google, and a regular focus group discussion. We regular coordination with the Ministry of Empowerment. So we also have regular talk show for children. We also have developed child online protection code of conduct. We also develop online platform and hotline for complaints on children cases and etc. So in cybercracy program, digital parenting webinar is a part of cybercracy class online that engaging representative from children online protection with some topic related to current issues of children, parents, and social media, and also online protection for children in the digital world. Especially during this pandemic, we continue to carry out virtual meeting with the various team and various segments with the target audience for class children, parents, teachers, and so on. So next slide, please. So this is the downstream, or we can call negative content handling or law enforcement in Kominfo Indonesia. Here with the MCI Indonesia provision of internet negative content control technology that we have utilized cyber drones in order to monitor and report a negative content. So this is a more sophisticated technology in a report in controlling negative content on the internet is needed and in development. So this technology is necessary to do a regional and partial content control. Thus, when there may any security threat or social disorder happens, we can blacklist the access of certain electronic system operator in certain area. So in the end, that when the cases has to be carried out by law enforcement, the MCIT police surrenders to handle by national police. So besides that, the MCIT also have a special civil servant investigator, or we can call PPNS, in the field of ITE law in collaboration with the Indonesian police. Next slide, please. So here with the guidelines for Indonesia Roadmap Child Online Protection 2021. At 2016, Indonesia MCIT with UNICEF, with our multi-stakeholder, and also Ministry of Empowerment of Women and Children, and with Indonesia Child Online Protection, together initiated to make the guideline or an introduction for a roadmap. So in 2019, we have an introduction for a roadmap. So this book consists of the significance of regulation to strengthening the protect children while using the internet, and explain about the synergy and multi-stakeholder collaboration become important points in implementing programs, material, and substances related to child education in internet utilization. If you want to see the book, we can find and download the book for free at www.literasidigital.id. And on this meeting, we are very happy that this year ITU has launched the new guideline for the protection on child online protection, because since last September 2020, MCIT and other relevant stakeholders are designing to build the roadmap protection of child online as a complement to the introduction to the previous roadmap. So on this occasion, we would like to convey and ask permission that we will make the ITU 2020 guidelines, child online protection, as one of the sources of our roadmap, which we plan to launch this roadmap around April 2021. Okay, so thank you for your attention, and I hope we can have fruitful discussion for this virtual workshop. So do not stay away the technology from children, bring them closer to technology so they can have the technological immunity for their future. Thank you. Back to you, Fanny.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ridsky, for these very comprehensive, action-orientated, and positive and committed contribution to today's session. It is great to see that the guidelines are taken into consideration so immediately after their launch into concrete policy development. Before entering the discussion, and I think there will be, I saw there already some questions related especially to the government position. I would like to give the floor to our industry representative today, Ms. Shanta Arul, who oversees, again, the strategic policy initiatives, industry development and relations for Netflix across the Asia Pacific, who will represent the private sector community here today and share with us an overview of tools and resources available from the private sector to ensure a safe space for children and families online, highlighting different levels of engagement from the industry side at the global, regional, and local level related to COP. Shanta, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly fine.
All right,
Please
great. Thank you so much for having me here today. I think we have some slides to put up as well. I'll start as we get the slides up, but you know, we're very honored to be here speaking with you today. As Netflix, we really support and are aligned with a lot of the work that ITU is championing, particularly the focus on providing resources and tools that support the various stakeholders, government, industry, educators, children and their family, and strengthening digital skills to navigate this evolving digital environment. So let me start first with a quick introduction to Netflix and the kind of tools that we have built to empower our consumers and help parents make informed decisions about what their families watch on Netflix. After that, I will share how we engage in digital literacy efforts to raise awareness and education about these tools, and how we work with the broader industry to support multi-stakeholder engagement as we move this discussion forward. Next slide, please. So Netflix is an internet entertainment service. We are subscription-based and our content is all curated. It's produced by directors and creative professionals. So we're not a service that has user-generated content, and we also do not have ads. We offer a wide range of content and really seek to give our members the ability to choose what sort of content they want to watch. And our mission is really to support diversity of storytelling. Our core value is really to give our creatives the creative freedom to tell the stories they want to tell the way they want to. And we see great responses from consumers around the world who appreciate the wide range of content that Netflix is able to offer. And in that space of content diversity, we also invest in hours of kids and family-friendly series and films across genres. Mighty Little Beam is one of them, as you see from the picture here, is one of our popular Indian animation series that has been watched by millions of children around the world. We just launched Over the Moon, our animated film that is based off a Chinese fable, so also speaking to our Asian kids content that's on the service. And we also invest in controls that I'm going to talk about a little more shortly. Two unique features about services like ours, which we often call online curated content services, is one that we're a pull model where consumers are making active choices about what they want to watch, which is quite different from switching on a television and a child being exposed to whatever is on screen. So we want to be able to safeguard consumer choices, but we also have technology which allows for the development of features like parental controls that allow parents to manage the experience for their families and helps limit access to content that might not be suitable for younger audiences. This type of technology did not exist with traditional media, but OCC services like ours are able to help offer these tools, and we really feel that it's our responsibility on the industry side to do so. So speaking a little bit more about those tools and resources, what we've learned along the way as we've built our product is that all families are different in their needs and expectations. We find there's always a range of parenting styles. And as Stephen mentioned earlier at the start of this dialogue, there is a need for protection that's also balanced with the need for participation. And likewise, with parents, you find parents who really want their children to engage and have independence online. It's an avenue for education. And then there are also parents who want to protect their children's experience and make decisions for their children about their content choices. So with all that in mind, we built our parental control tools. And next slide, please. These include things like ratings, customized children's experiences that filter age-appropriate content, profile locks, and the ability for parents to see what's being watched on the different profiles. So just to show you a couple of those visual examples, we have a profile hub, which the account lead can manage. They can create rating settings that are different across the different profiles on Netflix. Next slide. So this is a different view where you can have adult profiles as well as children's profiles. And the children's profiles are really catered for younger viewers. There's a lot more animation. It is very much engaging, and you can also filter content for the age appropriate level. And if a child were to try to enter the adult profile, they would face a pin prompt. So if we move to the next slide, please. So the PIN is managed by the parent, and the child would not be able to access the adult profiles. Next slide. We also have ratings so that the parent can manage the rating for each profile. And there's also a specific title restriction bar. If there are additional titles that parents don't feel comfortable with their children watching. For example, we've got a documentary series called Our Planet. And it's a very important documentary talking about the impact of climate change. But at the same time, there are certain distressing themes that parents may not find suitable for younger audiences just because it is distressing. So parents also then have a lot of flexibility to determine the experience for their children. Next slide. We also have ability to disable autoplay so that parents can manage how much content a child is watching in succession. And if we move to the next slide and the next slide, you can also have viewing activity, and this also allows the parent then to have conversations with their children about the content they are watching. Next slide. So moving on to the multi-stakeholder approach, we definitely believe it's important to have a collaborative approach between industry, regulators, parents, and NGOs that can support consumer choices, but also ensure the right controls for minors. Just like for the COP guidelines, we know that digital literacy and education efforts are key to ensuring consumers are aware and savvy about these controls. So it's not just about having controls, but ensuring that people know how to use them so that they can get the best of their online experience for themselves and their families. And we look to work closely with the ITU and the Family Online Safety Institute, for example, who we see as global leaders in best practice. And at the same time, we also work with local NGOs who really have that local expertise and reach, like ICT Watch or Cyberkreasi in Indonesia, the Foundation for Media Alternatives in the Philippines, to support education around parental controls and have conversations around how we distribute resources to parents and schools for this education effort. It's also about building a community of like-minded stakeholders who are committed to digital literacy efforts in a changing digital environment. So recently, as you can see here in this slide, we had a series of workshops across Southeast Asia where we brought the Family Online Safety Institute in. ITU was also present, and we really discussed some of the challenges that are being faced in countries like Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. We discussed the roles of companies like us as private sector companies in enabling parental controls. Kominfo was also part of the dialogue in Indonesia. So we continue to be building these partnerships as these education efforts are things that really need to be constantly reinforced. Last slide, please. And ending on a positive note, I think we really want consumers and children to experience the best of what the internet has to offer. And to that end, we too have a variety of documentaries on Netflix, which shed light on important issues happening around the world. And as part of our digital literacy efforts there, what we have done is start to partner with educational institutes to create learning resources alongside some of these documentaries so that students can watch and discuss current affairs topics and get a valuable experience from their viewing with those discussion guides on hand. And we rolled some of this out over the COVID lockdown period where people were stuck at home. There was a huge need for home-based learning, and definitely there was a lot of need for more ways to engage students at home given how much time they were spending there. And so some of that included us putting a series of our documentaries on YouTube so that more people could access this content for free, together with educational discussion guides so that parents and educators could use those tools to engage with their children after they watch these shows. We recently had a partnership with the Ministry of Education and Culture in Indonesia to put these documentaries also on a local broadcast channel, and the ministry paired them with education guides and ran these documentaries at times where students were more likely to watch, and the teachers would then follow up after with the students to have discussions about water conservation, climate change, and what can be done then at a local level. And we really look forward to continuing to work on some of these efforts. In short, there's a lot to gain from being online. And for us, it's about ensuring consumer choice, but also having the right tools and controls in place to ensure that children don't have access to content that's not appropriate for them. And it's important, of course, to continue digital literacy efforts with the various stakeholders here to help people navigate this online environment and really reap the benefits of the great things about the internet. So we're looking forward to this discussion and working more closely with all of you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shanta, for this positive note in the end and for showing us and sharing with us these insights, showcasing the actions and measures that can be taken from the private sector side successfully to support children and families in learning digital literacy, but also in learning a lot about the world and other key issues and areas that are important for our societies. Not only focusing on safe platforms and tools, but also leveraging the opportunity that you use and that many platforms have to actually teach and educate and empower children online. So thank you very much to all our panelists for your interventions. I would now like to move to the question and answers session. Unfortunately, due to the very restricted time, we can only take one question today from the chat. So I would like to give the floor to each of the panelists to answer, if possible, in 30 seconds, very shortly, what the question asked by David Wright in the question and answers session or chat of today's session. what could be the first step in adopting the COP guidelines at the government level from your individual perspectives, stakeholders' perspective. So I would like to give the floor first to Ella to respond to this question, if possible, in 30 seconds. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Ella.
Thank you, Fanny, and thank you, David, for your question. And also just a quick thank you also to all the other panelists. I really enjoyed hearing your presentations. Look, in response to the question, I think a first important step to undertake is a needs assessment, and I guess a stock take of sorts, to understand the state of play in your country. So, for example, has any research been undertaken? Are there any stats or prevalence studies that can give you an understanding of the issues at hand? Then I think it's also really important to set out which stakeholders you need to engage with as part of a multi-stakeholder approach. I think the guidelines have really great checklists and examples to use to support countries in their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ella, for keeping it so short and clear. I would like to give the floor to Anil now to answer the question in 30 seconds, if possible. Thank you. The floor is yours, Anil.
Thank you. The question is about who in Nepal collects information on cyber crimes and who maintains the data. So this is a fairly new area of work. So we have a Cyber Bureau of Nepal Police. They collect such information and they keep the database of cyber crimes. And they also work with a NECMEC in the US, and they work on the cyber tips. So far, we don't have much organizations collecting such information. And Child SafeNet is collecting the case documentation of online safety issues related to children. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anil. I would now like to give the floor to Ms. Risky to answer the question, what could be the first step from the side of the government to implement and to adopt in the first place the child and protection guidelines? I think based on your presentation, the answer is very concrete already. So if I may ask you to answer in 30 seconds, please. The floor is yours, Ms. Risky.
So the important thing is cooperation is the most important thing. The government has a program, but if without collaboration and support from all multi-stakeholders, so the program cannot proceed as it should. So therefore, it requires engagement and supporting from all multi-stakeholders, not only in Indonesia, but all the world.
Thank you very much, Ms. Risky, for the additional element here of cooperation as a key step or as a key condition for successful cooperation, for successful work on child line protection. I would now like to give the floor to Ms. Shanta for a 30 seconds answer to the question, what could be the first step in adopting the guidelines from your perspective?
So I think we're
Shanta,
very...
the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. We're very happy to engage with the ITU and all the stakeholders here to have those discussions on a country level. I think from our perspective, the industry, of course, plays an important role in their responsibilities in this space. And, you know, as we've covered, parental controls, we feel are definitely an important way forward for the industry to be able to ensure that there are age-appropriate spaces that are available online. And of course, supporting digital skills and capacity development to really strengthen digital literacy efforts. I think for us, education is really key, and we look forward to working together on those.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists for answering this question. To summarize, I think the key elements that were mentioned here are first, of course, an assessment of at the government level, at the country level, what is actually already there, what frameworks, what policies are existing, and also how and who needs to be engaged, what stakeholders need to be engaged through cooperation, how to establish an effective and coordinated cooperation. If there is a program at the government level, then it is dependent and it is needed that all stakeholders cooperate in order for this program to be efficient. And at the last element, of course, the very key point of education, that is well, the necessary condition to prevention on for online risks and harms for children. So on this note, I would like to express my sincere thanks for all the panelists for their contribution today and for sharing with us your commitment to the protection of children online. I would also like to express my heartfelt thanks to all the attendees for your presence and meaningful engagement. And I hope this session will propel us forward to support our children and future generations to thrive online and offline, contributing to a meaningful connectivity for all. It has become clear today once more that in order for our societies to successfully achieve digital transformation, supporting national economies, we need to invest in our children, and we need to do so now. As the nature and impact of ICTs is borderless, promoting online safety will require global efforts through collaboration from all stakeholders at the national, regional, and international level by developing a harmonized child online protection framework. We believe in collaboration and, most importantly, in partnership. And as we know, this issue cannot be solved individually. And therefore, we hope that the implementation process of the COP guidelines will be reflecting the actual review process of the documents. I would like to invite you all to join our effort and to be sure that children are listened and protected online to thrive, to become the leaders of tomorrow. On that note, I conclude our program for today. Take care and stay safe, everyone. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Fanny, for the excellent moderation, and also again, on behalf of ITU as well, just wanting to thank all participants and all attendees for being here. And yeah, we look forward to working with you ensuring child safety online. So on that note, I think I'd like to end this session today, and perhaps I would like to invite any of my colleagues out there who would like to perhaps say a few words. Again, thank you so much for being with us today. Really much appreciated. We have Atsuko Kuda. If I could hand over the floor to you for your for any final words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you, Fanny, for moderating this session. And this concludes today's session, day 2 of RDF. Now, I would like to invite the participants to the tomorrow's session, day 3, 4th of November, from 10 a.m. Bangkok time. We focus on the policy and regulation, and we would like to highlight some technical studies that we have been conducting to promote the affordable infrastructure investment in Asia and the Pacific. So please feel free to join us tomorrow at 10 a.m. The link will be sent to the participants shortly. So thank you very much and good night, good afternoon, good morning, and see you all tomorrow. Bye.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone. Thank
Sean.
you. Thank you,
Bye,
Scott.
everyone.
Thank you.